Good evening. We'll call this regular meeting of council for Monday, February 24th, 2014 to order. I'll ask council to consider the recommendation that the regular meeting be suspended and the committee of the whole meeting be convened. Moved by Councillor Carlick-Pearson, seconded by Councillor Kenny. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Krekic. I'll refer council to the committee of the whole agenda. The first recommendation there is that the agenda for the committee of the whole meeting of February 24th, 2014 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Carlick-Pearson, seconded by Councillor Garon. Any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. The next heading here is petitions and delegations. We have a presentation from Dr. Andrew Walker and Miss Madeline Whitaker, both with the BG group. I'd ask them to come forward, make themselves comfortable here. Good evening. First of all, on behalf of Prince Rupert City Council, I want to thank you for coming here this evening. This project has sparked a lot of interest in Prince Rupert, and of course, unlike some of the other proposed LNG projects, this one is in our community. And please take your time this evening. You are on television, so I'd ask you to use a mic so that people at home can hear what you have to say. After you've done your presentation, I'll ask the council members if they have any questions of you. So please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Your Worship and councillors. When we met briefly in the fall, you mentioned that it would be useful for the council to hear a bit more about how the proposed LNG developments in your community fit into the global LNG dynamic. So we've brought Dr. Andrew Walker here this evening to speak to that theme, talking about the supply and demand dynamics of LNG, maybe some of the lessons learned from previous projects and what we see the future looking like. Andrew has been working in this space for over 20 years. He's considered an industry expert and spends a lot of time on the international conference circuit speaking to this theme. So thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. Andrew.
Thank you for coming here. And Dr. Walker, if I could, you may have heard some adverse stories about the climate here on the north coast or the weather, and I want to assure you that what you saw today, we enjoy it, and it's like that more often than not.
It's obviously a well-kept secret, I guess. I was going to start by saying it's my pleasure and indeed my honour to be here to address you, to be invited to address you, Your Worship, councillors. And I was going to say it's indeed a pleasure because the weather today was fantastic, and I live in London where it's been raining forever, so it's so nice to be here. I'm going to talk for, I guess, about 20 minutes. So I'll try and keep it to about that length. As Madeline said about the LNG industry, and my job within BG is really to take the bigger view, the global view. So I'm going to give you the BG Group view of the wider industry today. I'm going to start with a quick overview of the company. I'm sure you know who we are, an international oil and gas company, and we pride ourselves on our two highly distinctive capabilities, our world-class exploration record and our unique LNG model. And in fact, we believe that we are a leading industry practitioner in the LNG space, even though we're not as big as some of our competitors. If we look at LNG today, it's about 10% of all natural gas consumed worldwide is traded as LNG. So that represents about 240 million tons of product, or about 30 BCF a day. I guess BCF a day, is that the units, the local units, as it were? So just to put that in context, Canada currently consumes about 8 BCF a day. So total global trade about 4 times as large as the Canadian market. About 10% of all gas consumed, and about about 1/3 of all gas internationally traded. So 30% of total gas is traded internationally, and of that 2/3 is generally pipeline, 1/3 LNG. So that gives you a sense of the scale of the trade. Currently there are 17 exporting countries, 27 importing countries, and we have as an industry about 380 ships, similar to the one that you see there, trading worldwide. And really LNG is driving the globalization of the natural gas industry. Natural gas was traditionally a very regional industry. It's becoming globalized with the seagoing trade. If we look at those, if we look at the importers, here's a ranking of them as they stood in 2013 and as they're forecast to stand in 2018. You'll see there are, to the left of the slide, a number of quite large importers, in particular Japan, China, a growing market, Korea, India, Taiwan. So Asia represents the largest importers and the bulk of the market for LNG at the moment. And then you'll see there's a long tail of smaller players in places like Europe, island states, Southeast Asia, such as Singapore, South America, Argentina, Dominican Republic. So you can see there's a wide spread of importers, but as an industry, our market has been and continues to be focused particularly in Asia, with Japan traditionally the larger player, but China starting to catch up and starting to emerge as a large importer as well. I said that gas has traditionally been a regional commodity and is globalizing. Well, pricing is still very regional for natural gas, and you can see on this graph we can see the prices for the US Henry Hub marked HH at the bottom, which is currently actually paying slightly more than that, just above $5 at the moment because of the weather. But the US generally a low-priced market. NBP, which is the price in the UK, the National Balancing Point hub price, Europe paying about $10, and then Asia, post-economic crisis, has been paying somewhere between $15 and $20 for its gas, which is generally indexed to oil. So as oil prices have risen, that's pulled Asian gas prices up. But even the small amount of cargoes that are traded on a spot basis, you can see we have a very tight market at the moment. Spot prices in Asia up at oil parity, so gas is pricing at the same price as oil on an energy equivalent basis. So you can see pricing still very regional, and it's the arbitrage between the low Henry Hub prices being set by the cost of production in North America and the high Asian prices, which has kind of led to the push for exports from North America, from the US and from Canada. If we look at the supply side of the equation, here are the suppliers I talked about earlier, and you can see again there are some big players to the left hand side. Qatar is currently the world's largest exporter with just under 80 million tons of capacity. Australia, a lot of construction currently underway in Australia, 60 million tons, which will by 2018 will make that the world's largest exporter. And then again you can see a long tail of other exporters, Asia and Atlantic Basin, so a wide spread of suppliers, but again a very focused industry in terms of the larger players. Next. Here we see. Yeah. Where does Canada fit in? If we go back, I'm hoping Canada is in there, but probably not because it's
previous.
Previous one. By 2018, Canada won't have exports in place based on this forecast, and I think that's probably right if we look at the timing of the proposed projects. So Canada, if we were to plot this in 2020 or 2025, would then start to emerge onto this chart. How big will Canada be? Different people will have different views, I guess, as to how many projects will be in place by 2020 or 2025. Offhand, this is a forecast from Wood Mackenzie, an industry consultant, and offhand I don't know what their Canada forecast is by 2020 or 2025. As a company, and I guess we are a gas company, but as a company our belief is that we're going to see continued growth in demand for natural gas. It's going to grow at about 2.4% per annum compound out to 2025. And that in turn is going to drive good demand for LNG worldwide. So you can see these are the various leading industry commentators. So those lines are really a consensus view amongst the leading commentators. And you can see the industry expected to grow from its 240 million tonnes of trade last year to just over 400 and between 400 420 by 2025. So the view is that markets will continue to consume LNG, there will continue to be good demand growth for LNG. And if you look at the band that's under construction, primarily, as I said, Australia, you can see a supply-demand gap starts to open out 2018 onwards and starts to grow, so that by 2025, industry consensus suggests that there needs to be another 150 million tonnes of supply in place over and above that currently under construction in order to meet this demand. And in our view, there is additional demand if additional supply can be put in place to meet that demand, but we as a company tend to see supply being the constraining factor in the industry rather than demand. These are complex, capital intensive, time consuming projects, and as an industry it's tended to be supply that's constraining rather than demand over the 50 years that it's been in place. Who will meet that supply-demand gap? Well, no surprises. Canada are one of the key contenders, but there is competition emerging, and that competition, the supply environment has evolved quite rapidly over the last 2 years. So we're seeing the US emerge as a potentially large-scale exporter. First project for exports already under construction in the US Gulf Coast, due to start exporting sometime around the end of 2015, early 2016. East Africa, a lot of gas has been discovered over the last 2 years in Mozambique and Tanzania. So they are now a very prospective exporter. And one dot that's not on there, but Russia at the end of last year sanctioned a project up at the top, Yamal LNG. So Russia are also starting to emerge in the mix of key suppliers to meet that supply-demand gap. Now Canada obviously has a lot of projects proposed. I took this from the Government of British Columbia website, so I guess it must be true and accurate. 13 projects proposed, as you're well aware, in Prince Rupert and at the port of Prince Rupert in Kitimat, and then a few other Squamish, Campbell River down towards Vancouver, Kitsault up just north of us. So a wide slate of prospective projects, both small and large, a wide slate of stakeholder project developers, again, both small and large across that slate. So Canada positioning itself to compete for that supply-demand gap post-2020. But as I said, there is competition emerging for supply. So over the past 3 years or so, we've seen a rapid increase in the number of projects proposed in the US. These are DOE filings with the Department of Energy, and you can see that now stands at 29 projects. 250 million tonnes worth of capacity. The industry, as I said, was only 240 million tonnes last year, so there's as much export capacity proposed in the US as the whole size of the industry at the moment. And our view, and I think the view of most commentators, is that far from all of that capacity will actually get built. In Mozambique, you can see how rapidly Anadarko has kind of discovered gas in that country. First discovery back in 2010, first appraisal well late 11, and it's now sitting with over 120 TCF of gas in place to underpin what will probably be quite a large-scale project. If we take a look at BG's view of how this competition plays out, in our view, as I said, far from all of that US capacity will be built. In our view, by 2025, we'll probably see between 60 to 70 million tonnes of US export capacity in place and exporting. And it's quite hard to, given the large scale of applications, and in fact I'm just noticing this chart needs slightly updating because it's sitting at about 225 applications. But in terms of total applications, what will actually limit the exports? Well, actually, few of these projects are in places where there is local opposition of a scale that will stop them happening. There are a couple. Of probably of more importance or of higher criticality in our view is the fact that many of these projects are being developed by developers that don't have the capability, in our view, to deliver large-scale, capital-intensive, technologically complex projects. But even then, if we take a view as to which ones that discounts, there's still over 100 million tonnes of prospective projects that we think really could happen, and what really decides how many projects happen and which ones is going to be the buyers. In our view, the buyers will pick which projects happen. People won't build these speculatively, they'll only build them if they have buyers. And we have a view that the buyers are going to take a view as they look forward that they want a diversified set of supplies. So they're not going to buy all of their demand requirements from the US. They're going to buy some of it from the US. They're also going to buy some from other locations such as Canada, such as East Africa. And I think the other indicator of that is not only diversity of supply, but also the fact that a lot of the buyers and importers are taking quite large positions in terms of the resource in this market, in terms of capital investment in places such as Canada. So as we look forward, we see the US supplying some of that demand gap, and bear in mind that doesn't quite look like 60 million tonnes because some of the US is already under construction. Places such as Canada, East Africa, Russia will meet some of what we've marked as other. And the exact mix of supplies from those other locations is going to depend on the buyers, the stakeholders in the chain, so the government, local stakeholders, financiers, and companies such as ourselves. So creating alignment between the stakeholders will determine how quickly and how many of those Canadian projects are able to come to market and compete into that piece that's marked other. If we look at where the LNG will go, and this is our forecast through to 2020 of where the markets for LNG will be, you can see it's still going to be all about Asia. Japan, Korea, Taiwan marked at the bottom there, JKT. Emerging markets equally important, in fact more important in terms of growth. India, China becoming a big player, and other Asia, Southeast Asia becoming equally important. Less demand in the Atlantic Basin, or less demand growth in the Atlantic Basin. And that's a good thing, I think, for Canada, because Canada's geographically well placed to supply Asia. And so this was really our view of the market outlook, which we gave in September. There's been a lot of speculation that the emerging wave of supply from the US in particular will create a buyer's market. We're not a strong subscriber to that view. We think there's an illusion that there will be a kind of flip to a buyer's market. Some of the reasons for that are marked here. We believe new supply will take longer than some are envisaging. Each of those suppliers has its own challenges, its own advantages, but its own challenges. And we think that this supply competition is going to emerge in the 2020 and 2020 onwards timeframe. New US LNG projects, non-US LNG projects will also be required, and in fact it's going to be the buyer's choice that they continue to have a view that a diversified supply set is of value to them, so they will bring on non-US volumes. The industry isn't going to commoditize immediately. It's a very uncommoditized industry. There isn't a huge liquidity in the industry, and we don't think the current dynamic is going to change that, despite what some commentators are saying. As a result, prices will remain regionally differentiated. Prices will be higher in Asia than Europe, than the US. And we're believers in demand upside. So even if our view on supply and supply constraints are wrong, we believe markets, and in particular some of the strongly growing markets in Asia, will be there to be able to accommodate some of that additional supply. So hopefully that's a useful overview for you of the industry, the size of the industry, the dynamics, the markets, the suppliers, and an overview really of our view of how the market will evolve over the next decade or so.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Whitaker, have you got anything to add?
No, not particularly.
Please pull that right to you so it's
okay.
easier when you sit still.
Nothing major further to add. If people have obviously any questions about any of this content, Andrew obviously is not sitting in Canada, so isn't directly involved in the project we're developing here, but if anybody have any broader questions, I'd be very happy to take them.
Thank you very much. I'll ask members of council and members of the staff if they have any questions. Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Exactly what would you expect from the city of Prince Rupert?
Other than the nice weather? In terms, I talked about really stakeholder alignment, and these are large, complicated, capital-intensive projects, and having been in the industry over 20 years, as Madeleine said, my observation is these are projects that need a push to get them into existence. So looking at the projects I've been involved in, getting the stakeholder alignment is key. If it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for us, but if it doesn't work for us, it doesn't work for you. It's we're in this together. And this is a chain in which there isn't usually a lot of excess rent. It makes a fair return for the investors, but this is not something that the pie isn't so big that we can just hand it all out willy-nilly, to use an analogy. So stakeholder alignment is key. What would we expect from Prince Rupert? Well, it's your areas of influence that you can help us and we can help you, as it were. So in terms of local government alignment, local government issues, we would kind of see you taking the lead on that. I'm looking at Madeleine on that, rather than ourselves, of course. So it's really us listening to you to see what you want, but also you need to be aware, the state government and the federal government need to be aware that this now is a global industry and you're competing on a global basis. So, we can talk about what's reasonable or what's not reasonable, as it were. But I've seen many supply chains fail because of lack of stakeholder alignment. People get entrenched in positions that they consider to be fair, but it just means that nothing happens. And the one thing that the buyers are very conscious of, because Asia, for the Asian market, security of supply and dependability are key watchwords. And they become very wary if it looks like projects are stalling or not making progress or are not supported by governments, because they are dependent on looking forward and planning their markets, the markets of Tokyo, Beijing, Seoul. They're dependent on projects being delivered kind of as planned. And so when they pick the projects which they want to buy from, they're looking at the credibility of the developers, the government support, the local support. And if it looks as though those projects may or may not be making progress, then they become very wary of committing to those types of projects. And they have options at the moment, and they're looking across those options to decide who will supply gas into Seoul in 2022. Who can they depend on? So that's a bit of a rambling answer, but I've kind of encompassed a lot of issues there.
You are right, though. There is a lot in consideration of this, and it is intertwined. It's just not local ideas and suggestions and considerations at play. Are there further questions? Councillor Cunningham.
In your expert opinion, how many of these projects do you think will go ahead in this region? Sorry. In your expert opinion, how many of these projects do you think can be sustained in this area?
Well, when I'm looking at it, I guess I'm looking at it from the bigger picture, from the kind of the market dynamics, from buyer behaviour. So rather than taking a view, okay, Prince Rupert as our location can sustain 1 or 2 or 3 projects, I'm kind of looking at what in my view is a likely outcome in terms of the supply-demand looking forward. And in my view, and actually it's kind of when BG has done its modelling, we have 3 projects in Canada, but not quite as early as your state government has kind of suggested they will be in place, in our view. And I think that's probably a realistic outcome, and I suspect they will be slightly phased, so you won't see 3 projects from day one. You'll see kind of projects come on and expand over that time period. So by 2025, I'd say there will definitely be between 1 and 3 projects in this region, and our view is 3, but probably the 3rd project is later in the day than the earlier 2.
And there'll be the bigger projects of those on the list.
I'm kind of discounting Kitsault or Squamish as being those 3. In our view, there will be 3 world-scale projects, 2 to 3 trains each. Not necessarily to that full capacity by 2025, though, in our view.
We'd prefer to think of them as the BG Group, Patronus, and another one within the harbour here. Mr. Long, you had a question. Mr. Long's our city manager.
Yeah, it wasn't a question, just to thank you. I know when you were here last time, we asked you a number of the questions, which actually been, I think, brilliantly answered here. Makes me feel comfortable that you actually heard what we said and you supplied the information that we were interested in. So thank you for that.
Councillor Cunningham.
You're in the process of doing your EA right now?
Yeah. Yes, we're just coming to the end of summarising our baseline studies. In terms of the timeline for our EA, we're expecting to file kind of around the late summer, but there's a lot of consultation work to do before then. So we've been very grateful for the support of the community in attending open houses so far, and we hope we'll continue to see that support. It's really important to us.
And the other question is, if you jump through all the hoops, would your startup day be?
Assuming all hoops are accomplished, we'd be looking at a final investment decision probably in 2016, and that would see operations commence sort of 2020, 2021.
Any further questions from members of council? Councillor Thorkelson.
My question is regarding employment. What is BG planning to bring people from outside the country here, temporary workers?
We're intending to, our plan would be to employ as many people locally as possible, and obviously that will depend a lot on the sequencing of a lot of the other projects and what labour is available. Our intention, and we're working very closely with the Premier and her working group on labour, is that BC really maximises that opportunity for the people of Prince Rupert, of the North, of British Columbia, of Canada, North America, and then beyond. So we're working very closely so that we have a very clear view of what that schedule looks like, of what jobs are going to be needed when and for what period, so that you can maximise that training and really try and bring on as many of those, keep as many of those jobs local as possible. That's absolutely our intention.
And when would, that sounds like a good way to have a plan, and when would that plan be available? Because it's not just if you bring in workers, if workers are temporary foreign workers, or if workers come in from other parts of Canada, then we need to have a look at housing requirements, that kind of thing. And so what follows through from that is a type of person that comes here to stay, to live, or is only in looking at it as a camp job. Those are the kinds of things that are tied into that. So I was wondering, when do you see that you able to come up with that kind of a explanation?
We're doing that modelling work right now. In terms of looking at, as I said, the numbers of jobs in what skilled areas are going to be needed for what period of time and for what duration. So we're doing that modelling work right now as our engineering becomes more refined. And our intention is that we would be coming to the community and laying out exactly what that looks like later this year. So hopefully towards the summer we'll have much more information on that for you. We've had a lot of questions about that, and we're keen to get to you with good data as soon as we can.
Yeah, I think part of those questions are because our one of our ministers from the provincial government was saying that it was difficult to envision British Columbia being able to supply enough trained people in this short period of time. And I didn't see a report in the newspaper about speculation on if that were true, where those other people would come from, but Canada's pattern right now is being to bring in temporary workers, and so then, of course, what kind of housing would that be, etc. And so those things are very important.
Ms. Whitaker, your information that you speak of will be appreciated. I've asked the staff here, and with the support of the council, to look at putting some baseline information together. So, of course, we have some sort of plan here for whatever projects proceed, so it would be baseline information with a layover of what could be applicable as these different plans or the different projects start, whether they pile all on top of one another or they come within 3 to 5 years of each other. So we ourselves are looking at information and the effect that it would have on construction, direct and indirect jobs, Stats Canada multiplier, looking at the community as a whole, and then again looking at the effect it would have on our fire and rescue service, our policing service, such things as our recreation facilities. And the information would be shared with the District of Port Edward. It would be shared with the school district number 52, the Northern Health Authority, so that everybody can get an idea of how they should react. So your information will be appreciated. Mr. Krekic, our city planner, has a question, and he's actually the fellow who's putting our information together. Mr. Krekic.
Thank you, Your Worship. Dr. Walker, this is a wonderful presentation. I really appreciate how you put together the high-level look at the industry. I have a host of questions. I'm just going to have one for today, and that is, considering the market dynamics and buyers' idiosyncrasies, as you put them, how would you gauge LNG industry to oil industry? Are they as robust, close to robust, or not at all?
It depends on your perspective and what you mean by robust, I guess. I mean, the LNG industry and the oil industry are two very different industries. Oil is a global commodity and it's traded. There's a lot of intermediation. I can ring up tomorrow and buy a cargo of oil from somebody or sell a cargo of oil to somebody. So it's a very disaggregated chain. LNG is almost the opposite. Traditionally, it's been a buyer and a seller will put in place a chain for me, buyer A, to supply you, buyer B, and that chain will be in place for 20 years. And if I'm going to build an LNG facility and spend a lot of money on it, and I know there aren't that many buyers who can import LNG and have the cryogenic facilities, then we'll hook up and we'll kind of create a bilateral agreement that means the industry traditionally hasn't been very liquid. It would be very hard for me to, and it still doesn't have a huge amount of liquidity. It's becoming more flexible, but it would be very hard for me to pick up a phone tomorrow and buy an LNG cargo from somebody or sell an LNG cargo to somebody. We have lots of people who offer to do that, but very few of them actually have any kind of access. So they're two very different industries. Now, if you talk about robustness, that's really a price issue, I guess. Is oil going to stay higher, or is gas going to stay higher? Well, to some extent, it depends on, use of, oil is driven to a large extent by the automobile, the car, and it depends on, future evolution of that to some extent, plus the emergence of the US as a self-sufficient oil supplier. Whereas gas tends to be a more diversified market. It's used a lot more in power gen. It's used a lot more in industrial processes. And it has a reputation as being a clean burning fuel. Very few people now use oil truly for power generation or, those types of processes. So it's a good question. We're a gas company, so we kind of believe in gas, and there is a good future for gas as a clean burning hydrocarbon. Having said that, I suspect people's desire to continue to own cars and the fact that electric cars are a little way away, oil is going to stay pretty high for a while as well. So that doesn't kind of answer your question, I know, but it
does. My question comes actually maybe a little bit closer to where the rubber hits the road, and so when we look at Fort McMurray and we look at how oil industry is robust in investing ahead of the curve, I'm not sure that I'm completely understanding LNG industry, although I've been around it now for 10, 12, 14 years, seeing different projects coming through our region, whereas when I look at Fort McMurray, the projects that were talked about 12, 14, 15 years ago are now already old. They're building new ones. But thank you very much.
Any further questions? Thank you very much for coming here this evening, all of you, and I know you're probably on a different time zone than we are, and well, there's people that like to stay till the end of the meeting in hopes of getting some sort of acknowledgement or, I think, gold star in the future. You're not required to do that. But thanks very much for coming. We do appreciate that you've traveled all this way here to answer some of these questions, disseminate some more information about what could be a very worthwhile opportunity for our area. And the fact that you're willing to share the knowledge, thank you. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. I hope to be back again soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Pond. Next, in terms of the petitions and delegations this evening, there's a presentation from Ms. Carrie Wick and Mr. Dwayne Nielsen, and they are both of the Prince Rupert, Freudian slip, Port Edward Harbor Authority. And this is an activity update. Good evening. Thank you both very much for coming here this evening. The Prince Rupert Harbor Authority is much talked about and with interest. Of course, I believe a lot of people are aware that you're the managing agency for the small craft vessel facilities in Prince Rupert as well as Port Edward.
Thank you for having us here today. We're very excited to have the invitation. So first, my name is Carrie Wick, General Manager for the Port Ed Harbor Authority, and with me is Dwayne Nielsen. So how we're going to do this is I'm just going to give you an overview of what we are and how we relate to small craft harbors, and then Dwayne's going to go through the different harbors and just give you an update of what different projects we've gone through in the last few years for our maintenance that we've done. And we've actually left Port Edward out of this for today because we're assuming that you want to focus on Prince Rupert harbors. So first off, the Port Edward Harbor Authority was incorporated in 1996 as a not-for-profit corporation. The initial harbor that was taken over was Porpoise Harbor in Port Edward, and that's where the name came from because that was the first one. Then we had Rushbrook, Fairview, and then lastly came into play was Cow Bay. The Harbor Authority manages these properties for small craft harbors, and our revenue solely comes from our services that we provide for our customers. All our capital projects are coordinated and decided by small craft harbors. The Harbor Authority does have some input, but it is the decision of small craft harbors what we do and when it's done. Port Edward Harbor Authority's mandate, flip this over, is committed to the preservation of commercial fishing harbors as a historical and valuable asset for the people of the North Coast. So our mandate is to make sure that our commercial fishermen and the ones with aquaculture do have a safe and accessible harbor. So Small Craft Harbors is a nationwide program, and they have 1,038 harbors. And their mandate is to keep the harbors that are critical to the fishing industry in clean and safe repair for our commercial fishermen. And repairs are based on the needs for each harbor and the liability that they pose to the Crown. So here we go. So I'll give Dwayne.
Good evening. Cow Bay, being the smallest harbor that we manage, people kind of look at it, I'm sure, in Rupert as a little quiet little harbor, and they probably wonder what goes on there, and lots of vessels tying up and coming and going all the time, and well, and just managing the place. We are down there a minimum of twice daily to count vessels, to know what vessels are there, so we can bill them properly and stuff like that. We do have some with recreational vessels that are there. Sometimes it's hard to catch them because they're in and out so quick or whatnot. We do have a kayaking company that does work out of there in the summertime as well, with tours and rentals and stuff. In terms of maintenance, we have some of the wharf head the decking in the wharf head has been replaced in the last couple of years. The main floats have all the decking and stringers and mooring have been replaced in the last couple of years as well. So they're sound floats. We do need to do some upgrades just to the approach to the wharf head, which hopefully we'll be getting on that as well in the near future here. It is a central area. We do have in the summertime the seine fleet and the gillnet fleet are there. It is pretty busy, and in the off season, depending whether the dive fleet is in or out, sometimes it looks like there's no one there. But when the dive fleet is in, it's a central area, and they like to congregate there, and it gets to be pretty busy sometimes as well. Rushbrook floats. We've got approximately about 150 vessels that tie up there on average, year-round. We did a float reconstruction in 2009, 2010. It was all redecked and all new timbering put into it and stuff like that. All the brand new electrical upgrades were done as well in 2011. And the breakwater was, we had some upgrading to the breakwater in 2010 as well. The approach and the wharf head were all redecked as well. Yeah, just keep going right through to. Fairview floats. We have approximately about 140 vessels there that tie up throughout the year. It is just like Rushbrook. It is full to capacity. It is hard to get another vessel in there unless they're rafting up. We have done a lot of repairs and upgrades, new construction and stuff in the past, well, up to the last 6-7 years, actually, up until recently. We've had to remoor the entire breakwater there back in, because it had let go in 2009. In 2010, 2011, we put the new section, a new section double breakwater on the north end of it, about 300, 400 feet of it there, and hopefully we'll continue that later on, sort of expanding that to the south. All the entire floats are reconstructed in 2010 as well. In 2009, we had a new building the foundation concrete steel structure put in place with and we put some new piles in just out front of what you're looking at there, going down the ramp, which will be intended. They're intended for a new office space. We're just looking for some funding and stuff like that too. Hopefully in the near future here, we'll see. We're not too sure exactly when it's going to happen, but it's going to take some time to put a new office space in there. And we have customers that we work with that we're hoping to work together with to utilize that space. Let's see. We have a new sanitary treatment, and it was installed in 2011. And yeah, that's about all I have for Fairview there. Questions?
Thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation. You've spoken about the docks being filled to capacity. Have you got any plans for any expansions and other enhancements beyond what is there today?
At this point, in Prince Rupert, we don't have any ability to expand outside of our water lot. That's not to say in the future that won't happen. Right now, we're trying to lobby with Small Craft Harbors to show them that we are the northern hub here. It's between us and Steveston. Steveston's down south, and here we are. We have most of our fishermen come up here, and they do realize that we're at capacity and that we have to raft. So we are talking to them about it. So we're hopeful, but there's nothing set in stone.
Perhaps if you'd like to get some further information together and send it to the City of Prince Rupert and the Skeena Queen Charlotte Regional District, we could give you letters of support to help you in that regard. Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for your presentation. Who sits on your board? I assume there's a board.
Yeah, I have 7 members on our board. I have Davy Dalzell. I have Dave McDonald, Sheila Seidemann, John Farrell, Bill Shepard, Larry Keane. Is that it? I think I got it. And Roger Atchison. Thank you.
And who makes those appointments?
Our membership is. Sorry, our membership is the District of Port Edward. So down the road, there's another year for all of them. If in fact the City of Prince Rupert would like to be, put somebody on the board, they can send a letter to us and we'll forward it to the membership.
So we don't have anybody. We currently
no,
don't have anybody.
Councillor Garon, Mr. Dalzell some years ago was appointed as a city member.
So how often are appointments made?
Please go ahead.
It's 2-year appointments. That's how long they sit on the board for.
So I don't ever recall anybody coming to us for any reappointments since I've been sitting here.
Well, the Prince Rupert Harbor Authority hasn't come to us.
The Port Edward Harbor Authority.
Pardon me.
Yeah.
No, we've never come to the city of Prince Rupert. Dave Delzell is definitely, somebody that's from here, but our membership is the District of Port Edward, and that's where it is. And what we try to do, and the District of Port Edward tries to do, is to put local interest groups who they feel can represent the interests and the needs within the communities, both of them, and appoint them that way.
Okay, just be nice to have Prince Rupert involved somehow instead of just standalone Port Ed. I think maybe you might have more clout if the two communities join together. So I don't know what that would look like, but just to plant a little seed out there.
Mr. Nielsen.
I just wanted to mention, in terms of our harbors being commercial fishing harbors, we do obviously allow recreational vessels within our harbors, and we do try to accommodate them the best that we can. Between the commercial fishing vessels and the recreational vessels are two totally different categories, which at times can be hard to keep everyone happy down on the floats because they expect different things and think things should be run differently and stuff like that. But we try to accommodate them as best that we can because we are short of space in this town for recreational vessels, and we always have tried to help as best as we can. One thing I wanted to add too was that with transient vessels, with the yacht club being short of space in the summertime, we go out of our way to do what we can at Rushbrook and Fairview and Cow Bay, for that matter, to draw those in so that those people and their vessels don't have to go across the harbor and anchor up. A lot of smaller vessels, say 40 feet, 50 feet and under, go to Rushbrook if we can fit them in. Whether they have to raft up to a fishing vessel, we talk to the owners or whatever we can do to try and fit them in, as long as those vessel owners that are transients don't mind that. And the larger vessels at Fairview, we try to fit them in as well. Fairview South, we brought in vessels, transient vessels, over 120 feet at times into Fairview, just so trying to accommodate them the best that we can. So if we have room, depending.
Thank you. There are some concerns. Of course, the charter boat fishing is our largest tourism activity here. And you're right with the different mixes of vessels there, and they're having to raft out. Some people have unfortunate experiences trying to get in and out. Councillor Thorkelson.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple of questions. One is, I notice that you only have one commercial fisherman on your board. Is that correct? These are commercial fishing floats, and so I would hope that the District of Port Edward would see fit to try to appoint a few more commercial fishermen to the board. I was wondering two things. Port Edward has exceedingly nice floats for I would think, much smaller group of fishermen that tie up there, although there are still large numbers of fishing vessels that do tie up in Port Ed. And they have floats now. They have drive-on floats, right? And I was wondering why that hasn't. There's been no discussion with the city about what we can do in Prince Rupert to provide that same kind of service at Rushbrook or at one of the other floats, such as, if it's possible now, maybe not even possible down at Fairview. So that's my first question. And my second question is regarding I saw the pictures of what you say is the North Float at Fairview, and I was wondering what's going on with the South Float. It looked in pretty rough shape when I was down there last summer. Have you got rid of some fingers down there? The float that's further out of the harbor.
Okay, first I'll speak to the drive down floats and the comparison with the Port Edward Harbor Authority in Porpoise Harbor. The drive down float, we just got the second one out there. Now, small craft harbors will prioritize their projects based on the need of the harbor and also the how the wharf is, if it's, how compromised it is. So what sort of liability will come to the Crown from that? The way they can justify putting another drive down float out there was that our spine float in Port Edward, as much as it may have looked nice, it was a cement float, was actually, it was past its useful life, and it was deteriorating at a rapid speed right now at that time. So they were able to say, let's put something else there that's going to last 20 more years that will promote more aquaculture plus help our fishermen out there. Port Edward, as much as it looks like there's not a lot of fishermen out there, that's where our gillnet fleet goes every year. That's where we have of all our lockers are out there. That's where our seiners get their nets. That's where our herring nets are stored. All their equipment's out there. So that is our main spot for our fishermen, not only in Rupert, but in the whole north. This is where they go and they get their supplies. Rupert, having Rushbrook and Fairview, we'd love to have a drive-down ramp down out here. And I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but we can't say for sure that it will happen. One thing that could be done is Mayor and Council could agree to send a letter to the Port Edward Harbor Authority, to the Board of Directors, and tell them what you want. Put a wish list together. That would be something that you could get the ball rolling. But right now, they don't know exactly what you want. And commercial fishermen on our board, we're very lucky to have Roger on our board, but as you know, the commercial fishermen are extremely busy, so to twist somebody's arm to be on our board is something that's been pretty difficult. But that is definitely another person that we want. We do want our board to have another commercial fisherman on there. So, you want to talk to the other one?
Please go ahead, Councillor.
Well, the reason I say that is because, I think the Port Ed floats are in great condition, and I'm well aware of the number of vessels that tie up there in the summertime. I'm also well aware of the number of vessels that use the other floats out in the summertime as well. And if fishermen want to bring their groceries down to their boats and provision, they are having to carry them down or slide them down at Rushbrook and at Fairview and they're continually wondering why they have to pack heavy equipment down in Prince Rupert, and it looks like the desire of the Port Ed Harbor Authority is to move people over to Port Ed for that kind of work on their vessels.
No, I can assure you that that's not the desire, and just to make it very clear too, is our membership is the District of Port Edward. However, they don't have any say in what happens out there. It's solely based on of what the needs are of the harbor and what the state of whatever small craft harbors chooses to make a capital project because of something that they need to make sure that the liability isn't so great. So. But like I said, definitely put a letter together for the Board of Directors so that they understand and they know.
Thank you. Councillor Garon, Councillor Kinney, and then Councillor Cunningham.
Just wanting to comment on the comment that was made about writing the letter to. I think that's a great idea. I think we need to participate more with Port Ed and the Harbor Authority, because what's good for one is good for both. So it's a win-win situation. Thanks.
Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation. Is there anything we can do with our war zone at Rushbrook for launching the charter boats, another area?
I think maybe we were talking about this today, that there may be some talks that we could get together with your operations and talk about maybe there's something that we can do to, help each other out there, because it is a war zone and it really affects our harbor attendant down there. So we'd like to just open up some communication about that, some opportunities that could could help each other out.
Thank you. Councillor Cunningham.
Thank you for coming. And in the last 3-4 years, I spent a lot of time down the docks. It's been a great improvement, especially from an environmental point of view. They've really cleaned up on the positive side of stuff you do. You know, we really appreciate the effort that goes into them. With the amount of money you have to spend, you can't spread it all around. I would love to see a ramp going down to the docks and a lot of other things that would make my job a lot easier in the summer sometimes too. But, you know, it's just the way it is. And I know where you're coming from with funding right now. Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you very much for your presentation this evening. I appreciate that you came down here. If the council decides to act upon your suggestions, you'll get the follow-through. Yes, please go ahead.
We are also trying to convince the Harbour Areas Association of British Columbia to host the conference, their annual conference in Prince Rupert for 2015.
Right. What time of year is it?
Usually about January, third week of January.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you'd like to send us some background information with a request that we consider that, we can certainly do that.
Okay.
Please do.
Great. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next on the agenda is the time during the Committee of the Whole meeting for the question period from the public. And if there's anybody this evening who has any questions pertaining to the city's operations, you're welcome to come forward and to ask questions pertaining to that topic. So I'll ask if there's anyone who wishes to come forward. I'll ask a second time if there's anyone who wishes to come forward. All right, I'll ask the council to reconvene to the regular meeting of council. Moved by Councillor Garon, seconded by Councillor Kenny. Any discussion? Question has been called. Those in favor? Thank you. I'll refer council to the agenda for the regular meeting of council. The first recommendation is that the agenda for the regular council meeting of February 24th, 2014 be adopted as circulated, and that would be with the inclusion of the item labeled 8B, and that's entitled Council Resolution Regarding Community Charter / Local Government Act Amendment. So we'll include that resolution as item 8B. I'll ask council's consideration of the motion to adopt the agenda with the inclusion of that item. Councillor Cunningham. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Kenny. Yes?
I believe we were going to have a report about ferries. Where were you planning to make that?
I was going to provide that in the mayor's report.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Call for the question. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. Next for council's consideration are minutes for adoption. There's 2 sets of minutes tonight. The first are the minutes of the special council meeting of February 11th, 2014. The recommendation is that they be adopted. Moved by Councillor Carlick-Pearson, seconded by Councillor Garon. Are there any errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are adopted. Next for council's consideration are the minutes of the regular council meeting of February the 11th, 2014, and the recommendation is that they be adopted. Moved by Councillor Garon, seconded by Councillor Carlick-Pearson. Are there any errors or omissions? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Those minutes are adopted. Next, under petitions and delegations, we have a presentation from Captain Fred Denning and Mr. Paul DeReeves, General Manager of the BC Coast Pilots, and the presentation is on the role of the BC Coast Pilots in the marine industry and in the Prince Rupert area. Good evening, Captain Denning. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Your Worship.
Please make yourselves comfortable. If you're getting a little dry, grab yourself a glass of water there. Don't let me stop you. Please proceed when you're ready.
Your Worship, councillors, thank you very much on behalf of the British Columbia Coast Pilots for inviting us to make our presentation here tonight. It's truly a great honor to be here and be able to speak with you about probably my favorite subject, I suppose. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Captain Fred Denning. I'm currently serving in my 7th year as a director of the British Columbia Coast Pilots. I've served 4 years as vice president, 3 years as president. Today I'd like to give you an overview of the BC Coast Pilots. I personally have a long history with the Port of Prince Rupert. Many of you know I was born and raised here. So were my parents. And my children, for that matter. I began my sea career in 1969 in Prince Rupert with Armour Salvage, sailing out of Prince Rupert for almost 20 years before I moved to the South Coast. So moving into the profession that's pretty much occupied my time for the last 24 years, what is a marine pilot? A marine pilot is a professional licensed mariner whose role is to work with the captains of foreign ships on the safest routing to move ships on our coast. We're intimately familiar with the coastlines, inland waterways, shoals, harbors, ports, weather conditions, tides, currents, shipping regulations, and restrictions of the area for which our pilots are licensed. We use our years of experience to safely guide ships as they move on our coastal waterways, taking into consideration all the variables that may impact the best routing choice on any given day. Marine pilots are also familiar with the different propulsion systems, hull design, rudder characteristics, and the various types of ships, and how these will react at different speeds and in different wind, tidal, and current conditions. Under Canadian law, every foreign ship over 350 gross registered tons are required to utilize the services of a marine pilot when they enter the waters of British Columbia. While within compulsory pilotage waters, a pilot has the conduct of the ship. That is to say, the pilot is responsible for the safe movement of that ship through the various passageways along the coast, so there is no damage to the ship, its crew, or the marine environment. The BC Coast Pilots are the experienced mariners responsible for piloting foreign vessels on the 15,000 miles of BC coastline, from the southern Canadian border all the way up to Alaska. All of the areas on the BC coast include the west coast of Vancouver Island, and the Queen Charlotte Islands fall under the compulsory pilotage legislation. The British Columbia Coast Pilots Limited is a private company consisting of about 100 licensed marine pilots who contract their services to the Pacific Pilotage Authority, which is a Crown corporation charged with ensuring the safe and efficient pilotage system is provided on the BC coast. Approximately 55 of the pilots are based in the Vancouver area, 40 are based in the Victoria area, and 5 pilots are based in the Nanaimo area. We also maintain 3 rotational pilots in Prince Rupert at all times to look after the traffic in this area. These 3 pilots are able to handle the normal workload in the port, but whenever there is an increased demand, we are able to bring any additional pilots to Rupert on about 12 to 24 hours notice, depending on the time of day of the requirement. This process offers the port and local marine industry the security that all assignments will be covered while continuing to provide coastwide pilot availability as required by our agreement with the Pacific Pilotage Authority. The BC Coast Pilots maintain the highest level of coastal expertise. as evidenced by our enviable 99.98% incident-free record. The BC Coast Pilots are active members of the Canadian Marine Pilots Association, or CMPA, which represents the interests of the Canadian Marine pilots at the national level. I'm currently serving as CMPA VP Pacific Region. The BCCP is also an active participant internationally through the International Maritime Pilots Association, or IMPA. The IMPA organization, with over 7,000 marine pilots from 40 countries, meets biannually to develop resolutions regarding the provision of pilotage services. IMPA is also a member of the International Maritime Organization, or IMO, which looks to improve maritime safety and prevent pollution from ships. BC Coast pilots ensure vessels are safely navigated through the various waterways along the coast, so there is no damage to the ship, its crew, the public, or the marine environment. British Columbia is home to one of the most pristine and ecologically sensitive maritime habitats in North America. We play an important part in ensuring that BC's 15,000 miles of coastline sheltered waters are preserved. This same coastline is also a vibrant commercial waterway for large ships traveling to and from major world ports. Ensuring commercial interests coexist with the preservation of the marine habitat and safety is very much the role of the licensed pilot. The career path to becoming a pilot. Every BC Coast pilot is licensed and has on average 25 years of experience in the marine industry. This typically includes a minimum of 5 years as a captain, extensive training, an apprenticeship program, and rigorous examinations. Most pilots begin their seafaring career by working as a deckhand on local vessels or as a junior officer or cadet on a foreign-going ship. They gradually work their way up through the various seafarer ranks as a certified officer, gaining required coastal sea time and local knowledge. This takes several years and requires many examinations along the way. After they have obtained the required local sea time, candidates can apply to take an examination to become a licensed BC Coast pilot. If they pass both the written and oral portions of the exam, they are placed on a waiting list until a piloting position becomes available. When a vacancy opens, pilots then undergo a 9 to 12 month apprenticeship program, which includes further hands-on training under the direction of senior pilots. During the apprenticeship program, simulator training takes place in Baltimore, Maryland, and training on man models occurs in Port Revel, France. Once the apprenticeship program is successfully completed, candidates will receive a restricted pilot's license and become a member of the BC Coast Pilots Limited. Over the course of the next several years, they will gradually be able to operate larger ships until they finally receive a fully unrestricted pilot's license after completing 6 years as a licensed pilot. Senior pilots continue to receive ongoing training over the course of their career to keep current as new ships enter the West Coast market and technology changes on the ships. All BC Coast pilot members have undertaken additional training in bridge resource management, Azipod propulsion systems, and fatigue management. Also, GMDSS and advanced ship handling skills are dealt with in ongoing training. The majority of this training is taken at the ship simulator in Baltimore or with the man models at Port Revel. There are also other training centers that BCCP has used over time, including simulators in Dania, Florida, Seattle, and in Vancouver. Man model training has also been done in Poland and England. For new developments on this coast, BC Coast pilots work closely with the Pacific Pilotage Authority to ensure fundamental safety standards are considered and adhered to. We work with developers and regulators to be sure that all piloting-related issues have been considered, including the passage to and from new developments, approaches to the berth, navigation aids, appropriate assist and escort tugs, up-to-date surveys of the waterways are available, and any other relevant points that may be of interest. Often a simulation program will be required for a new terminal to give basic proof of concept. These simulations will include prevailing wind, currents, ship size and type, and assessment of tug requirements. If required, the results of the simulation may be reinforced with live ship trials. Once trials are completed, BCCP will report to the proponent on our findings, which are forwarded to the appropriate regulator to give insight from a piloting perspective. We may also submit requests or make recommendations for new or enhanced navigation aids that would improve the overall safety of ship movement. We will also make recommendations regarding any specialized or ongoing training for pilots that may be beneficial for a specific development. This will generally be done by the Pilot Training and Examination Committee, which is a joint BCCP and Pilotage Authority standing committee. In recent years, BCCP has played an important role in the development of new terminals, including container ships, cruise ships, and more recently proposals for oil and LNG terminals. As examples, we were actively involved in the successful startup of the Fairview Container Terminal here in Rupert, and the expansion of the Deltaport Terminal just outside Vancouver. We were also consulted on the development of the cruise ship terminals in Victoria, Prince Rupert, Campbell River, and Nanaimo. For the Fairview Container Terminal, BC Coast pilots working with the port developed a tug escort protocol to ensure the safe passage of larger ships entering and leaving the port. All our pilots participated in the training for the new process. At Deltaport, simulation trials were used to establish operational weather limits and tug requirements for the larger container ships that would be using the expanded using the expanded terminal. For the cruise ship terminals, the effects of wind and currents were studied to establish safe operating parameters at these berths for various sizes of ships using the facilities. Recently, we have participated in the development of procedures to ensure that ships are moved in and out of coastal ports with the highest levels of safety to preserve and protect our coastline and the surrounding environment. In Prince Rupert and Kitimat, we have been consulted extensively on both oil and LNG projects. Safe navigational access, escort and berthing tug requirements, navigational aids, and berth orientation are some of the issues we are working on regarding the proposed energy projects. BC Coast Pilots has been engaged in consulting role on the Enbridge Northern Gateway project since 2005. On 3 occasions, in 2006, 2008, and 2009, the BC Coast pilots have sent representatives to the Force Technologies Marine Simulator located near Copenhagen. During these sessions, many different scenarios were explored and risk mitigation components were developed. In the past year, we have had pilots on 3 separate simulation studies related to energy proposals in this area, specifically LNG proposals. When Kinder Morgan was looking to increase the draft of tankers transiting Vancouver Harbour, BC Coast pilots participated in a risk management study that took 2 years to complete. This resulted in Port Metro Vancouver rewriting the Second Narrows Movement Restricted Area regulations. BCCP has a long history with the Port of Prince Rupert. We have worked closely with the Port Authority in the development of several projects, starting with the Ridley Island Coal Terminal and Grain Terminal in the 1980s, through to the opening of the container terminal at Fairview, and most recently, Pinnacle Pellets. We continue to have a very close and professional relationship with the port to ensure that the port is successful and ensures the highest safety standards in the movement of goods. Last year, in addition to the work done regarding energy proposals, we worked closely with the port to restructure the anchorages to provide the maximum number of safe anchorages to service the port. This chart shows the broader approaches to Prince Rupert from the Triple Island Pilot Station to the harbour, including the anchorages in Chatham Sound. The Port of Prince Rupert is the second busiest port in BC with the shortest trade route to Asia. Based on information from the port, 454 ships called at Prince Rupert in 2013. Coal, grain, and logs are showing very strong numbers, with container traffic doubling and overall ship numbers up 50% in the last 5 years. These ships' visits in 2013 generated 1,275 pilot assignments for Prince Rupert, which is approximately 10% of the assignments done in that year by BC Coast pilots, coast-wide. Of those, 1,180 or 87% were handled by the 3 rotational pilots, and the remaining 95 assignments were covered by pilots either passing through or who had been brought in to do those assignments specifically. The assignment numbers and pilot utilization are monitored and discussed at regular meetings that are attended by North Coast marine industry stakeholders. Any necessary adjustments to the number of pilots in Prince Rupert will be made based primarily on this type of data. A good example of the work that BC Coast Pilots engages in with ports and industry is the process that allowed increased tanker drafts in Vancouver Harbour. As a result of the risk management study for tankers through the Second Narrows in Vancouver, new channel width parameters that meet current international standards were implemented. This requires a minimum height of tide relative to the ship's specific maximum beam to provide sufficient channel width for a safe transit under international standards. New tug escort procedures were developed using simulator and live ship trials. For these studies, an international expert on the use and abilities of modern escort tugs was brought in as an advisor and worked with our pilots in developing a process that is seen as leading edge and providing an unparalleled level of safety for ships moving in confined channels. New navigational aids were identified as being needed to provide visual confirmation of the ship's position in the channel during transits, and these were installed by the port. Also, real-time tide height and current information has been made available to give pilots the best possible information while they're making these transits. One of the risk mitigation factors identified for the heavier tankers through the Second Narrows was a navigation system, independent of the ship's existing equipment, to be carried by pilots. This evolved into the development of portable pilotage units, or PPUs, for the BCCP that are tailored for the unique pilotage conditions on the BC coast. PPUs were developed in cooperation with the Pilotage Authority and the British Columbia Chamber of Shipping. They are now required to be carried for Second Narrows transits, are used coastwide in the province, including in the waters of Prince Rupert and on the north coast. All these new processes and knowledge that has been compiled during the 5 years it took to complete this project will be used to benefit other projects on this coast. Many of the tug escort and other risk mitigation components that were identified during this project for tanker traffic have been identified as requirements for tanker traffic on other parts of the coast, specifically North Coast proposals. Going forward, there are a number of considerations for our company and our industry more generally around the province. Making sure we have an adequate number of properly trained marine pilots is important for us going forward. We monitor on an annual basis the projected need for pilots as we move forward. Until now, we have been able to manage the supply of pilots to the demands of industry. If we see the need, There are steps that can be put into place to access more candidates, but there would be more cost and a more lengthy and rigorous training process. An exam process was completed recently with 8 successful candidates coming through. Environmental stewardship is an important part of our mandate and continues to evolve. Marine restricted areas affect shipping routes, and the BC Coast Pilots continue to work to strike a balance between commercial interests and environmental protection in marine transportation. We have an ongoing dialogue with government, industry, and environmental stakeholders to ensure the environment is protected while shipping routes are negotiated. Finally, the use of technology and its adaptation will continue to be a consideration for our profession. By making sure we are adapting to and making use of the best available technology, we will better be able to do our job. As I mentioned earlier, senior pilots continue to receive ongoing training as ship technology evolves, and we will continue to stay engaged and up to date going forward. As an example, we are currently working with regulators and industry to enhance tug escort requirements for the tankers moving from Vancouver to Victoria Pilot Station. While tug escorts have been a requirement for many years, new tug technology has recently come available for us to take advantage to enhance safety in these waters. The BC Coast Pilots play an important role in safe marine transportation, protecting the environment and making sure we are fulfilling our responsibility to Canadians. Being independent from commercial interests gives us an advantage in fulfilling our mandate and lends credibility to our engagement with government and industry. Going forward, we will continue to work with stakeholders to ensure marine traffic is navigated safely through the BC coast, all the while protecting our environmental habitat as our marine community continues to grow. In our world, a safe marine industry is a sustainable marine industry. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Captain Denning. I'll ask the council, and while they're considering their questions, I'll ask you a question. Do you subscribe to the belief that the best pilots are former tugboat skippers because of their local knowledge?
The quality of pilots is very much based on the personality of the individuals. Every single member of our company has a different background. They have different strengths. They have different weaknesses. They have different personalities. The training and the process that we have in place for bringing pilots from entry level to fully unrestricted pilots focuses on their professional abilities, and I would say that we set a very high standard for our members, and our safety record pretty much speaks for itself at 98.98%.
Thank you.
99.98%.
One last question from myself. If my Canadian history is correct, General Wolfe beat General Montcalm on the Plains of Abraham, and was able to do that because evenings before any ships went in there, the pilots went in and did a marine survey of the area. With that in mind, the aids to navigation in and out of Prince Rupert Harbor, are they of a standard that they should be? Are they being upgraded? Where does the Coast Pilots sit with that?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a great relationship with the port, and there's damn few things in this world where there's not room for a little bit of improvement. And we've been working with the port, and the port has been great. I don't know if you've heard, but just recently there was a new light put into place on on Phillips Point on Digby Island. And Captain Charlton and myself, actually, at the start of the meeting, we're just talking about a survey for a sector range for helping ships come into the approaches to the mouth of the harbor. So this is an ongoing process. it becomes a little bit challenging at times because there are several different levels of government involved, but in general, Prince Rupert, the people in the management of the Port of Prince Rupert do a heck of a job in ensuring that the best possible standards are in place.
Thank you. Councillor Thorkelson and then Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very thorough presentation, and I think that obviously pilots have been making a contribution to safe marine traffic on the north coast on the whole coast of British Columbia and the north coast for a long time. I have 4 questions, and one of them is, have you been discussing moving the point of boarding west of Triple?
That point has been on the table for a period of time now, specifically for energy ships. We're speaking about LNG and oil tankers. Because of the size and handling characteristics of these ships, one of the risk mitigation factors that was mentioned specifically for the North Coast Energy project was to move the pilot station approximately 9 miles west of Triple Island. This would entail boarding pilots by helicopter only, by wire, not landing. The risk mitigation would be that the pilot would get on board while the vessel was still in very clear open water. It would give him an opportunity to have his bridge team management discussion with the master to get his technology, whatever our package at the time is, set up and running, and get a good feel for the ship and the conditions that he was facing before coming into confined waters.
And so what is the Coast Pilot's response to that? I realize it's more dangerous for the pilots. Is it something that you're considering?
We're very supportive of it.
I have a few other questions. You've talked about, I was just wondering where your authority is. So I assume that you take vessels in and then and see that they're anchored, and then after they're at anchorage you disembark?
Anchor or alongside a berth or whatever their final destination is. Yes, as soon as the ship's safely secured at its whatever point it's being moored at, that's where the pilot's job ends.
Do you move them from one anchorage to another?
We'll move them wherever they're required to be moved on the coast within the compulsory pilotage waters.
So that if they're moving from one anchorage to another anchorage, from the outer harbor to the inner harbor, say, they have to do that with a pilot on board the vessel.
The Canadian Pilotage Act requires that any foreign registered ship over 350 tons moving at all within compulsory pilotage waters requires a pilot on board.
I guess my last question is not to cast aspersions on the pilots, because I think your 99.8% success rate is wonderful. But you do have, but there have been groundings, like the recent grounding of the Hanjin Geneva and of the bulk carrier in the Douglas Channel, and so from time to time there are those problems. But I understand that the pilots work with the Transportation Safety Board to make sure that that lessons are learned. What do you see as a major problem with vessel traffic on the North Coast?
From a practical perspective, based on my own experience, one of the bigger challenges we have is interacting with small vessels while you're on a large vessel, particularly in the confined waters. small vessels under Canadian modifications to the international collision regulations are not supposed to impede the passage of a larger vessel, but seems some of the guys haven't read that bit. And it gets a little interesting sometimes when you're faced with a situation such as the pilot on the bridge of the Hanjin Geneva faced, where the options narrowed down to a point where he could either run over a fish boat with a number of people on board or take the ship to ground. Fortunately, this individual was extremely experienced and knew that one of the very few soft landings on the coast was right in front of him, so he took it to ground, and as you know, the ship floated with no damage. And thus, a number of lives were spared.
Thank you. Councillor Carlick Pearson.
Are you sure you're done? She stole one of my questions, so thank you, Your Worship. I have a couple of questions as well. With the current...
That was me.
Yeah, I know. That's okay. With the current increase talks within the region of industry and the setup that you currently have with the pilots being rotational, can you see in the near future something that's more permanent, that we have pilots situated in Prince Rupert and more pilots situated in Prince Rupert?
At this point, we operate under a coast-wide model. We're required to provide pilots for all ship movements up and down the coast. As I noted, the assignments in the Prince Rupert area constitute 10% of the number of assignments we put in a year. By keeping 3 pilots in Prince Rupert at all times, you're actually getting 6 FTEs. It takes 2 pilots to fill 1 year-round position because of our work rotation schedule. So, so long as it's effective for industry and it's effective for us, your fluctuations are dealt with by the process. You've always got 3 people up here, and if there's cyclic increases, a lot of times when bad weather comes in, we get a lot of a sudden increase in movements due to ships dragging anchor and such. It's been a lot better the last couple of years, but it still gets interesting at times. We're able to bring extra guys in as required, but should the picture change, should there be a justification for changing the model that we use, we're always open for discussion. We meet regularly with the port. We meet regularly with industry stakeholders. We exchange thoughts, challenges, and collectively come up with solutions. I think it's a very, very effective process.
Thank you. My next question is in regards to tugs and tug power. We're obviously going to see more tugs in the region because of this increase. Is that correct? And bigger tugs?
Well, I'd have to hope so, because tugs, although we don't have any direct control over the number or type of tugs that are in the area, we work with the tugboat industry and advise them as to what our wish list looks like. Insofar as the oil tankers, we would have very specific requirements in place for those based on simulation studies that have been done. The tug escorting piece is quite different from the ship berthing tugs. They're 2 different animals, and the standards, the construction, the design of the escort tugs has to meet some very specific criteria before they'll be seen as effective in providing the escort security that we're looking for.
Any further questions? Councillor Garon.
Thank you for your presentation. I think when I first got on council, I think it was the Canadian pilotage came, wasn't it, Jack? We sat in on a presentation.
It would be their employers.
Okay, yeah. And
the Pacific Pilotage Authority.
Yeah. Anyways, it was all very interesting, and I learned a lot. And I know at the time they were trying to recruit new people, and they were looking at people in the area. So any of these 8 successful candidates that have come through, are they local or?
No, but in the previous intake, one of your local gentlemen, Cole Stava, started as a pilot with us, and like myself, he's done most of his experience on the north coast out of Rupert.
Okay, but great to see more people, but I guess it's hard to find people that want to pursue that path or that have the hours, or I'm not sure how it all works, but it'd be nice to see more.
I couldn't agree with you more, but the decision is not ours. We actively pursue anybody and everybody on the coast that has the qualifications. It's an individual decision if they want to make the commitment to become a pilot. It's incredibly difficult to pass the examinations, and it's an extremely challenging lifestyle, and numerous people think about it, and others opt to do other things.
I can appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you very much for their thorough presentation, Captain Denning, and from time to time, please come back and update us as the port grows and as your activity here increases. I know at various times there's been considerations for more pilots with impending activity.
Well, thank you very much, Your Worship. It's been a pleasure to be here, and if any of the councillors or yourself have any questions, information, background that you're looking for, please feel free to contact us at any time.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Once again, thanks for coming.
You bet.
I'll refer council to their agendas. There's reports and recommendations. The first report is from the city planner. This is an application for a development variance permit for a residence at 343 7th Avenue East. Mr. Krekic, would you like to come forward and outline your report for those watching at home by television?
Yes, Your Worship. This is the second time this report is in front of you. At February 11th meeting, Council approved public notification, which was completed. The application is to increase the maximum height of the building by 2.5 meters. This is an older, well-maintained house. The owner intends to invest in excess of $100,000 to the improvements. Of course, the work will improve the house and commensurately the neighborhood. As this house sits on the high side of the road, the proposed addition will be marginally noticeable from the street. And to date, and at the time of this meeting, I did not receive any comments that would preclude approval of this development variance permit, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. So the recommendation of the council regarding this development variance permit is that the permit application number DP-14-01 for 343 7th Avenue East be approved. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Carlick-Pearson. Any discussion? Questions have been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. Next is a report from the engineering coordinator regarding the swimming pool renovation, and it concerns a RFP, a request for proposal award. And the report comes with a recommendation. But I'll ask the engineering coordinator to come forward, please, and outline his report for those here tonight and those watching by TV. Please make yourself comfortable there at the microphone. It's a grayish-green button to your eye when you're ready to speak. Good evening, Mr. Pucci.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening, councillors. So basically, as you are aware, the swimming pool is going to be doing renovations this summer. There's going to be a shutdown. Recently, the city commissioned a study to identify the necessary repairs required. We have put out an RFP, and this RFP was to provide detailed drawing specifications for the required components to submit to the city's review. Upon this approval, prepare drawing specifications and tender packages, assist the city with tender and award of the project, and generally provide engineering services for this. We had two potential proponents that submitted proposals, Williams Engineering and J.M. Bean and Company. We did a review process with the building department, the recreation department, the engineering department. All three departments agreed that Williams Engineering was our favored proponent. We felt they were the best qualified to perform the work. They had more experience with pools. We have worked with them in the past, and they actually provided us with the original study. We were very happy with their work. And they are already working on two other projects with the City of Prince Rupert right now, the RCMP and City Hall HVAC system work. So we're hoping that we can piggyback a couple of the site trips with that, so which would then further reduce the cost of it. The JM Beam and Company, they had 4 site trips, and Williams has 6, and we think that the 6 trips is probably what's going to be required for this project. And so we are recommending going with Williams Engineering, even though it is a little bit higher cost.
Thank you very much. So just for people that are watching at home that may not have the agenda, the purpose of this renovation study was to evaluate issues with respect to structural, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, known as HVAC, and building envelope, and prepare estimates of construction costs to correct the problems.
Chris. Correct. Yep.
So the recommendation to council is that mayor and council approve the recommendations of the building, recreation, and engineering departments and award the design, tender, and engineering services for the Earl Mall Aquatic Center renovations to Williams Engineering. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Garon. Is there any discussion or any questions? Yes, certainly. Go ahead.
How much higher are they?
They are approximately $10,000 higher. But they're, again, we're hoping that they can piggyback some of the site trips, which will then further reduce costs. And they have 6 site trips in with theirs. Sorry, it went off again there. They have 6 site trips, and the other company only has 4. So if the 6 are required as we think, then JM Beams would be a little bit higher. So there probably would only be about $3,000 to $5,000 difference.
Councillor Cunningham.
You're saying they're already working on projects in town, and they're still $10,000 higher, even though they're in the area already?
Yes, they're actually working on projects with the City of Prince Rupert right now.
So if they're going to be piggybacking on, are we going to get is there any chance of any savings because they are here, or is the final figure $10,000 higher?
We are going to talk with them about trying to piggyback the trips. We don't know if it's going to work out yet with the schedules. They've already started on the other projects. So we're going to try, once we award it, if we can go to award, that we would work out a schedule that would try to double up some of the trips so that they'd be up here for the RCMP and the City Hall, and then also for trips to the Earl Mall Aquatic Center.
Further questions? Councillor Carlick-Pearson. Councillor Garon afterwards.
So other than the structural component of it, are we going to see any upgrades in terms of cosmetics that are going to be happening? Like are the community members going to go in there and say, wow, it looks so much nicer? Or is it just structural? Go ahead.
Unfortunately, at this time, it's mostly all structural HVAC boiler system. A lot of the components that were identified are the must-have category. They are very expensive. The boilers are in excess of $400,000, and so there's a lot of the stuff that we're doing now are really the must-haves in the structural to keep it going.
This is some of the equipment from the early 1980s when the facility was built.
Correct. It's original stuff.
Right. Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
Thank you. The other question I have is, so if we have an increase in the boiler and different systems that are in there right now, are we going to see a improvement and in our savings? Because I'm sure that the older systems generate more.
Right, we're looking for efficiencies with new equipment.
Yeah. So it will generate.
Yes, it definitely should.
Councillor Garon.
So in your Williams, what are they called? Engineering. So they actually have more experience with pools. Is that what you sort of based your awarding on? More than the piggybacking?
Yes, they have. They're well known in BC for doing a lot of different renovations on pools. They have a lot of experience in pools. We chose them to do the study because of that originally. They're also familiar with the site as well. They come very highly recommended.
JM Bean has very few dealings with pools, or do you know? Or
they have worked on pools in the past, but they don't have as much experience or that they've put forward to us to review as much as in Williams.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Yes, please go ahead, Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
Do you know any of the other projects that the JM Beam have
It's right there. It's right there in the report.
In the that they've done in the region. Their name sounds familiar. I'm just trying to remember which JM Beam.
Yes, they've actually done work in Prince Rupert before. I think they've done work at the airport and a couple other places that they put forward. But again, swimming pools are very difficult to work on because of the humidity. So we wanted someone, or we're recommending to go with someone that has a lot of experience with pools, and again, that's why we're looking for.
There's no further discussion. I'll call for the question. Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. We'll move on to the report from the Deputy Corporate Administrator. This is regarding the alternate approval process resolution, and this is concerning a municipal boundary expansion. Mr. Long, I believe you're going to review the report.
Yes, it's fairly straightforward, Your Worship. We've followed the Act with respect to the inclusion of this particular property within our boundaries. We've gone through the alternative approval process. We've had no interest or no involvement of the public in terms of this, so it's now appropriate for the council to pass the attached resolution.
Right, so nobody has come forward with any queries or discussion questions at all. The recommendation on this matter for Council's consideration is that the City of Prince Rupert has obtained the assent of the electors to petition the Ministry of Community and Rural Development to extend the boundaries of the City of Prince Rupert as it appears in the local newspaper The Northern View on January 15th and 22nd, 2014, and that all relevant legislative requirements pertaining to a municipal boundary extension in the Local Government Act and Community Charter have been completed, and that the parcels approved for inclusion within the City of Prince Rupert are as follows, and these are the PDI numbers: 014-961-130, District Lot 444, Range 5, Coast District, except plans 1584, 1586, 1598, 1822, and 4804. I'll ask Council's consideration of this resolution pertaining to the boundary extension. Councillor Guerin.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Carlick-Pearson. Is there any discussion? Councillor Thorkelson.
I am opposed to this kind of referendum, but in this case, I'll be voting in the affirmative because this is property that the City of Prince Rupert owns. That why we had to take a referendum on whether we should put property that we own inside our municipal boundaries seemed somewhat strange to me. If we own it, it should be within our boundaries. So on that basis, however, if we are going to look at a boundary expansion, and we had to do the same thing, and the boundary expansion was a larger boundary expansion that we're speaking of, that we were investigating earlier across the across the harbor, then I would think at that time I would hope that this council would hold, if we had to do a referendum on such a large boundary inclusion, that we would have a referendum where the public actually got to vote. So I'll be voting in favor of this because this is a piece of property that Prince Rupert owns that obviously should have been should be part of our boundary since we do own it.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Thorkelson. I understand what you're saying, and if it wasn't property that the city owned, I can understand your reasoning. And of course, this piece of property, lot 444, also contains our source of drinking water. And it's prudent in terms of safety to have our source of drinking water for this community within our municipal boundaries. Any further comments? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. Next is a report from the Chief Financial Officer, and this concerns the 2014 5-year financial plan and property tax bylaw, the bylaws process. And there's more than one bylaw involved in this process. And the recommendation is that Council approve the schedule for the 5-year financial plan bylaw and the annual property tax bylaw. Mrs. Bombin, would you please outline the report for those watching on television?
Thank you, Your Worship. Each year, the city undergoes a budgeting process called the 5-year financial plan. The community charter requires that a bylaw containing the plan be adopted by council before the annual property tax bylaw is adopted. The property tax bylaw must be adopted before May 15th of the current year. Prior to the plan being adopted by council, City Council must provide a process of public consultation. City Council has already performed some key components of the plan, including the 2014 Community Enhancement Grants and the 2014 Preliminary Capital Purchases and Capital Works. The proposed schedule has been developed to guide the city through the 2014 financial plan process. It consists of 2 opportunities for public consultation, 2 meetings to conduct the reading of the bylaws, and a final meeting to adopt the bylaw. This schedule provides room, should it become necessary, to accommodate any further revisions to the bylaws prior to the legislated deadline of May 15th. It has also been drafted to allow for any changes that result from BC Assessment's final revisions to the assessment roll on March 31st. This is the reason for 2 readings of the bylaws on March 24th, with the 3rd reading at a special meeting on April 7th. Any changes can be incorporated between the 2nd and 3rd readings.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Council's consideration of the recommendation that Council approve the schedule for the 5-year financial plan bylaw and the annual property tax bylaw. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Guerin. Is there any discussion? Councillor Thorkelson.
Are we going to have any workshops for council where we can sit down and ask questions of the budget when we can sit down and have a working party?
We certainly could. Mrs. Bombin, have you got provisions there for that, should council so wish?
Yes, we can do it at one of those public consultation meetings for sure.
Certainly. Thank you. Any further discussion? Question has been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. We'll move on. Next is a report again from the Chief Financial Officer, and this concerns the 2014 budget presentation, and the recommendation is that Council receive this report for information purposes. Mrs. Bombin, would you please outline your report? Good evening, Mrs. Yu. Thank you for being here.
Yes, for those in the audience and on camera, I have our finance manager, Christine Yu, here with me. She'll be helping me present the report today. Each year, the City of Prince Rupert must prepare a 5-year financial plan as defined in the Community Charter, which was just mentioned in my last report. The financial plan process began in October 2013. Department heads were asked to estimate the cost of operating their department for the 2014 year. In December 2013, Council approved schedules of capital works and capital purchases, and then the community enhancement grants were finalized in February 2014. As final 2013 financial information becomes available, our prospects for 2014 become clearer, thus allowing us to prepare this budget for the 2014 year. The financial plan is being prepared with conservative assumptions regarding anticipated revenues and expenditures. The following assumptions and criteria have been incorporated into the budget: statutory financial payments, contractual requirements, memberships, grants and permissive exemptions, energy costs, and benefits. A status quo budget has been prepared only including initiatives that are deemed necessary. The 2014 operating budget consists of $30 million to operate the city services, including the utilities funds. It's $37 million. Notable differences between actual results in 2013 and the budget for 2014 are: all capital purchases and works are to be funded through grants or operating surplus carried forward from 2013. City West has committed to a dividend to the city of $250,000. Assessment change has resulted in an increase in property tax of $1.3 million, or actually rather almost $1.4 million, with a freeze of the municipal mill rate. Contractual wage increases and benefit increases result in an additional cost of $605,000. Airport ferry busing service costs projected to increase $145,000. Staffing change and increase in complement is approximately $318,000. RCMP will increase compared to the 2013 budget by $190,000. Energy costs are projected to increase by $41,000, and the utilities funds are self-funding. Increases in utilities rates have covered the projected costs. And based on the slide that you see up there, the 2014 operating surplus, the increase in tax revenue from the increase in 2014 property assessments, and the use of grants and surplus. Oh, sorry, I'm starting to read a little ahead of myself. Of the $15 million in taxes collected for 2014, this is just the property taxes. We have put in a pie chart where the money will actually be allocated. Okay, and this is net other revenues that the city already generates. So ferry is 6% of the $15 million in taxes. Cemetery is 1%. Fire is 19%. RCMP is 32%. Recreation is 17%. Transit 3%. Roads and parks is 17%. And grants to community partners is 5%. Capital is 0. As mentioned before, we are funding capital this year out of grants and surplus carried forward from 2013. The next slide shows the previous pie chart, which was in a percentage. This is based on dollar value. So ferry, as compared to 2013, which is in red, ferry 2014 is in blue. Ferry is $900,000. Cemetery is $200,000. Fire for 2014 is $2.8 million. RCMP is $4.8 million. Recreation is $2.4 million. Transit is $400,000. Roads and parks is $2.6 million. Grants to community partners is $720,000, and this is $1.4 million was actually approved by council, but this is the tax allocation after hotel tax and casino revenue is used. And capital, again, it's 0 because we are funding it through grants and prior year surpluses. The next slide just gives everyone a feel for the change in assessments. So in 2013 it's in red and 2014 is blue. You can see that recreation just increased just slightly. Business is about the same. Light industry went down a little bit. Newport has gone up. That's principally because of Pinnacle Pellet Plant. Old Port has gone up slightly. Major industry is virtually nothing in that class. And utilities, it's just a small increase in the assessment. The next slide shows the residential change. Residential went up quite a bit, as reported by BC Assessment, and also in the papers. On average, it was about 8% increase over prior year.
It's important, I think, to state that these are BC Assessment Authority property values for residential properties within the city of Prince Rupert.
Yes. So, based on the 2013 operating surplus, the increase in tax revenue from the increase in the 2014 property assessments, and the use of grants and surplus for needed capital works and purchases, it is anticipated that the city will not need to increase the property tax rate. Instead, we are budgeting a hold of the 2013 municipal mill rate. And that is my presentation.
Thank you very much. Provided there's no appeals. Keep your fingers crossed. Councillor Thorkelson, thank you for your presentation, by the way.
I have some questions, and I guess...
Please go ahead when you're ready.
Sure. First of all, is on page 20 of the package. It shows the financial plan, so it shows our budget and against our year-to-date last year. So last year we had our unaudited actual year-to-date was, I believe that number is 26 million in revenue, and it's hard.
That's the unaudited actual year-to-date December.
Right. Correct. So that's the last year, unaudited last year's revenues. And we have 24 million as operating fund. So we ran a surplus this year of $2 million. Is that correct? So when we look at those bar charts, were they against the budget? Because the budget was very different. The budget showed us with a loss of $4 million. So between a loss of $4 million and a surplus of, loss of $2 million and a surplus of $2 million, that's a $4 million difference.
Are you referring to the 2013 budget?
Yes. I'm referring to
You are talking about 2013.
I'm talking about 2013, right? And I think that was wrong. We didn't run it. The budget for 2013 was not it's a variance. So we were looking at the variance between the two budgets. Okay, so that's the difference. So anyway, so we ended up with a surplus this year of $2 million. What my question really was on your bar charts and pie charts, are you looking at the difference between the budget or between the two budgets, or are you looking at between the year to date and the budget for 2014?
The pie chart basically shows, this one shows the allocation that we're budgeting in 2014 for the property taxes, where they will go, and there's no 2013 comparison there. The bar chart is just exactly the same thing, only in the blue, but that would be dollar value. The comparison is to 2013 on property taxes, where they were allocated to which departments.
So it was the actual allocation, and so there was money that wasn't property tax that isn't shown on here. So this is just the property tax. And
any further questions?
Yes, Your Worship.
Please go ahead.
And so when I'm looking at the on page 26, when I'm looking at the tax revenue change, okay, so which what you were showing on the other bar charts after this one. So we have an increase in residential that you showed that is almost $600,000, and so we haven't increased the mill rate. But what the reason for that $600,000 is because of the increase in residential
values
and property values. Right. So we will still be making a fair amount. So when you make that as a tax increase that are people actually going to see on their tax bills, it's not a mill rate increase, but it's going to be a tax increase. So I was wondering what that looks like. You'd have to reduce the mill rate in order to have the taxes the same as last year.
That's correct. The increase is in the property value, not in the mill rate.
So I was wondering what people before in other years we've had a chart that's shown us what an average homeowner would be paying as an increase, and would a home that was valued
right, we do a chart up which takes various properties and does a comparison of that property with various values if you're going to change the mill rate.
Well, that was if you're going to change the mill rate, but here we have property values have gone up. So people's, in general, if all property values have gone up equitably, then everybody will have an equitable increase in taxation. But that's not usually how it works.
It doesn't work that way, as you're well aware.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so
what happens if properties have sold in a specific neighborhood and there's a number of properties? BC Assessment Authority would in all likelihood target that general area or properties of that type and take the latest value as a result of the real estate transaction, which the BC Assessment Authority believes is a current arm's length value.
Mm-hmm. So am I correct to think then that this is going to be a property tax increase for people in the residential?
The tax rate will not increase in the city bylaw, but the amount received by the city will be up by the change in values to some of the individual properties. So people will notice when they get their tax bill that there is a change, not because the city adjusted the mill rate, but because the BC Assessment Authority either increased or decreased the value of their residence.
Right. So if we were Vancouver and all of our houses were worth $400,000, we'd be paying a lot more. So these are houses that show an increase.
I've got you, Councillor Garon. You can take your hand down.
So houses that show an increase in value will be paying more taxes than last year. So if your house went up in value, you'll be paying more taxes. If your house went down in value, you'll be paying less taxes. And if your house was equal in value, you'll be paying the same taxes as you paid last year.
We'll get staff to answer that. Mr. Long?
Sure. When we will obtain more tax revenue, not necessarily because everyone will pay more taxes, because there is an addition to the assessed values. So there's an actual increase in the assessed values every time somebody builds a house. Increases the amount of assessed value. So that's one way in which we will establish more revenue. The other thing is, in terms of increasing your assessed values, if everybody's assessed values go up at the same rate, then your taxes paid isn't going to change. It's whether or not your rate went up higher than somebody else's. So that's why when we talk about a rate freeze or freezing the tax rate, that the assessed values are only going to have an impact at an individual level. They're not going to have any impact on the overall rate, because it's made up of the actual increases in the assessment and the increases in values that the BC Assessment Authority has attributed. And whether you pay more or less is going to be depending on how much yours went up versus somebody else's. So it's pretty complicated in terms of what the impacts are. And it's just, in terms of what we're trying to do here, is trying to hold the taxes at the same level in terms of the mill rate. And if we actually use our increased costs as a result of inflation, we use that increase in our assessed values to offset that. So theoretically, other than looking at it very specifically and individually, there shouldn't be an increase.
On top of that, there may be some changes to this because, of course, some people could appeal their values.
Well, that's why I was wondering if we had a workshop, because I still what I had understood was that if the taxes on my property were the same as last year, if the mill rate's the same, then I would be paying the same property taxes last year. But if the value of my house went up, then I would be paying more property taxes, which is just directly attributable to the increase in the value of my house. What it seems to me is, I just want an understanding whether I'm quite thrilled that we're not, for the first time I've been on council, talking about running a deficit. So, or increase the taxes. But
I'd like to reduce it further, but that's another conversation.
But that's not what I'm just trying to understand what the impacts are. So,
yes.
so if my house went down in value, then I would be paying less taxes than last year. So is this value? Is the value in here, this $600,000, is that mostly because in general the prices of house went up, or is it because we have a new housing stock being built?
It can't be in general. It would be based on new housing stock and specific changes to individual properties. It would not be
I understand it's not a flat rate, but
that's a good term. Exactly, it's not a flat rate.
Yeah, well, it never was. Even when we increased, if we increased the mill rate, not everybody was paying the same percentage increase in taxes. So what I was looking at here is that $600,000. What was there? Are people generally going to see, because did price of everybody's house go up in Prince Rupert by 2%, 1%, 0.5%? Is there a general?
Mr. Long.
Yeah, it will depend on what the actual increase in the assessment. So, new housing stock, etc., would take away from that impact. So theoretically, if there was $600,000 worth of more assessment, not in terms of value change, but in actual assessed values, then then everyone would pay the same. So we will have to find out how much is attributable to the actual assessment increase, the real assessed increase, as opposed to the increase in the value of all the assessment. Let's leave it at that. We'll give you these numbers.
We can bring in what the market change, non-market change in any new construction is, and we can also do a couple of scenarios between we'll pick a couple homes on various different spots in the community, and we could say what it was last year and what it's going to be this year, and we can just show what their assessed value changes and then what the change in their tax payable.
There was some general information released that we had a couple of weeks ago, and I believe it was in an information package about changes to values in the different classes in the various communities across the north and what went up and what went down. Councillor Guerin.
This is all clear as mud to me, and there's a lot of confusion going around. I'd like to workshop this. When we say there's
no confusion here.
Well, I'm confused.
Well, speak for yourself, please.
Well, I think other people here are a little confused because nobody's really got a clear understanding, and I'd like to have a workshop.
Thank you. Further comments? Councillor Cunningham.
I'm all for the workshop, but cutting through all the rhetoric, the taxes are going up because most people's assessments went up in this town. Mine went up 60,000. I appealed it, and they knocked 30 off. And talking to a lot of people around town, their assessments went up. I haven't talked to anyone whose assessments went down. So the bottom line is, keeping the mill rate where it is, our taxes are still going to go up. And I find this increase of $500,000 probably low from what I've seen. But it'll be interesting to see. Corinne will have a better figure on it than us, but bigger touch to it.
Well, it is still subject to change, as we discussed before.
Yeah, but let's have a workshop and get it out and find out what's going on. But our taxes are going to increase. Even keeping the mill rate where it is.
Not everybody's taxes would increase. Mr. Long, the evening for a workshop. Next Monday?
I think it's scheduled in accordance with the earlier memo. We talked about, was it March the 10th?
Okay, we'll leave it with a schedule then.
Yep. So we'll work it into the existing schedule.
Is that okay with council? Councillor Thorkelson?
That would be fine with me. I just had a couple of other questions.
Okay, if you could just hold on a minute. Councillor Guerin, is that okay with you?
I won't be here, but since I'm the only one that doesn't understand, I guess it doesn't really matter.
Well, you can come in any time you're available and talk to one of the the Chief Financial Officer or the Deputy and get an understanding if you like. Certainly. Councillor Garon, please go ahead. Or Councillor Thorkelson, pardon me.
So I was looking at the other figures. Major industry went up, and now is that major industry says it's gone up, increase in tax revenue by $772,000, and it was only. So I was wondering if that. Is that the pellet port? Is that the pellet plant, or?
Yeah, when we submitted this report, our collector came in and told us that she had put the one property in the wrong class. So this report is it needs to go into the new port property. So yeah, that part is just a little bit erroneous, but it was too late to change. We will have that updated for the next one for sure.
Anything further, Councillor Thorkelson?
No, I think have a bit of a look at this. I was wondering about the RCMP and the pie chart was so large, but I guess part of it is if.
The RCMP is the largest major expenditure on an annual basis that we have.
So is our whole operating budget run off taxes, basically?
No. If you look at that one schedule that you have right there, which I think you said was page 26, you look at all the revenues by department, and then the rest of the expenses come in. The property taxes is only a portion of the total budget. There's $37 million in total operating fund revenues, $7 million of which is the estimated loan from MFA. So that's not really an operating piece for us, but we had to include it in as revenues, and you'll see the corresponding $7 million loan to the airport down in expenditures further down. But ultimately, about $30 million is what it's going to take to operate the city, and only about $15 million of that is going to come from taxes.
Right. So when we look at the chart, the charts that you just shown us, you're saying that this chart is just the property taxes, and so that the pie chart may change if you added other monies to it from the other revenues that the city has.
This is on a net basis, so you take all the other revenues minus off the expenses. What's the net deficit? And that's what the property taxes go to fund, and that's how we split it up.
Right. So would that pie chart look exactly the same as if you took it as a percentage of all the city revenues?
This is the revenues allocated to the remaining expenditures. So if it's $30 million to operate the city, and $15 million of it is property taxes, then yes, hypothetically, I think that should probably work out, right? Because that's exactly half.
Any further questions? Councillor Thorkelson, you're also welcome if you think about it and something else comes up, you're welcome to get a hold of the finance staff and have further discussions. Any members of council are welcome to do that.
Yes, I appreciate that, and thank you very much. It's always something that I like to spend a lot of time thinking about, and that's why the workshops are helpful, because
sure,
it's a little bit. I don't know if anybody else in council feels that way, but I feel a little constrained by showing my stupidity on camera. So it might be.
Well, it's a good
ask 1,000 questions and have to ask them the same way 50 times. You start, I think, boring everybody. Plus, you look like you might, you should maybe retire next week.
Well, it's always a good overview and a good opportunity to get more in-depth understanding. Councillor Garon.
Yeah, I concur with Councillor Thorkelson, and I don't pretend to be the only one that doesn't understand, and I really take the great insult to that. Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll move on. The recommendation there is that council receive this report for information purposes. I'll ask council's consideration of the recommendation. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Carlick-Pearson, seconded by Councillor Giron. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor?
I didn't second it.
Sorry, Councillor Thorkelson seconded. Moved by Councillor Carlick-Pearson, seconded by Councillor Thorkelson. It was passed unanimously by those present. Thank you. Next is correspondence for action. There's a proclamation request in support of National Dementia Strategy. So it's in support of a national strategy. Comes with a recommendation that council adopts supporting a national dementia strategy and become more aware and engaged of the far-reaching effects of this disease. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. Next is item 8B, and this was a handout, and this concerns a resolution, and it would be resolved that the North Central Local Government Association and the UBCM respectively request that the province amend the Community Charter and Local Government Act so that a municipality's clear title to a property as a result of the municipal tax sale process cannot be disputed in a court of law or other tribunal more than once. And the reason the City of Prince Rupert is putting this forward is the intention is that someone who's lost a piece of property to a municipality as a result of non-payment of property taxes shall be allowed by law one right to appeal. Currently, under the present regulation, the former owner can continue an appeal process that can last for years. In the City of Prince Rupert's circumstance, there were 3 individual court cases and 2 appeals, a total of 5 individual court cases. And this would create a hardship on any municipality when each court case can take up to a year to get a court date, and each court case legal cost per individual case can be approximately $250,000. So therefore this is being submitted and in the hopes that it'll get support from other local governments and that the current regulations could be changed. I'll ask Council's consideration of the resolution. Councillor Kinney.
Yes, I'll support this because I remember it being brought up in Quesnel, NCLGA, and in Vancouver, so I'm very much in favor.
And this time around, the wording is much more specific. So it's moved by Councillor Kinney. Is it seconded? Seconded by Councillor Giron. Is there any discussion?
Question.
Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That's adopted. Next for Council's consideration is a resolution, or pardon me, bylaws. And this would be the bylaw number 3343-2014, and this is the non-motorized wheeled conveyance helmet bylaw. Comes with a recommendation that Council adopt the non-motorized wheeled conveyance helmet bylaw number 3343-2014, and it has been changed as per Council's amendment prior to this, so I'll ask the Council's consideration of the adoption of this helmet bylaw. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Carlick-Pearson, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Any discussion? Councillor Cunningham.
Yeah, in penalty 5.2, it says the first offense may be waived. I would like that changed to the first offense will be waived.
Well, actually, the legal term would be shall be.
Or shall be waived.
Yeah.
saying maybe means it's at the discretion of whoever's standing at that counter.
There's many legal papers that have been written on municipal bylaws and the use of the word may as opposed to the use of the word shall. Mr. Long, what do you advise?
Yeah, I think it's a semantics issue. If council's more comfortable with shall, it's fine. It has the same effect.
Okay, well, in order to put an amendment in accordance with the procedure for bylaws, we'd have to repeal the third reading of the bylaw, make the amendment, read it for a second time as amended, and then read it for a third time, and then subsequently have it finally adopted. What's the wish of the council? Councillor Cunningham.
Well, my initial reasoning behind this is if some kid comes in and has to pay a fine and then buy a helmet, it was a double hit. Now, the way, maybe I'm a little out in left field here, but maybe waived means it's not going to be waived. It could possibly be waived. That's the way I'm reading that. So I want any kid coming in here to know that it's going to be waived, not that somebody had a bad day at the counter and says, no, we're not doing it today. Not that our staff would ever do that. But
Mr. Long, your interpretation of the bylaw, obviously Councillor Cunningham has one interpretation, and your interpretation?
Yeah, my interpretation is that it's a requirement to do this. So the may is actually the permission to waive it in that particular circumstance, but it could also be the word shall, because it, I think, means exactly the same thing in this particular context. Okay. And so, if council's uncomfortable with may, then make it shall.
Sure. That's at the pleasure of the council. Councillor Cunningham, you started it. What would you like to do?
I would like to amend it to shall be waived.
Okay, if you'd like to
amend it.
Make that motion.
Yes, I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Okay, so if you could include in the motion the title of the bylaw, the number of the year, and the paragraph, so that we're repealing the word may, inserting the word shall. So it's been moved and seconded that the bylaw be amended as just stated. I'll call for any further discussion. Councillor Garon.
4.2, a parent or guardian or of a person under the age of 16 commits an offense if the parent or guardian authorizes or knowingly permits the person to not wear a helmet. How are you going to prove that when you send your kid out with a helmet on and doesn't keep it on? Who's going to prove?
Well, somebody's got to be responsible for the child until, I believe it is, over the age of 18, well, somewhere between the age of 18 and 19.
Most people aren't holding the hands of their under 16-year-olds out there that are skateboarding or riding bikes, so I just don't understand how the parent is going to be fined, and does that really stop the child from... That's where I'm going.
Sure, I understand.
I'm against this bylaw where I think if you're under 16, there should be some other kind of ways or means without a fine to get these people children to understand what they're at risk about.
Okay, have you got any suggestions?
I did suggest last time, but I was told it would be a babysitting service, so I just think if they had to go do some type of community service that made them stop and think about what they were doing was risky. So just to fine an adult because their kid is out there without a helmet is not fair. Because parents can't be with their children. You're not going to be out there with your 15-year-old holding their hand while they're out biking or skateboarding or scootering or whatever.
Well,
so,
certainly the whole idea.
And then that comes down to the people who have money can afford to pay the fine, and those who don't have the money can't afford to pay the fine. So in that sense, that's where I have a problem with the fining process, because I don't think it makes the risk taker stop and think about what the actual problem is.
Well, the whole idea from the council's point of view is, of course, safety first, but it's up to the whole council to decide.
I understand that part. wearing a helmet is important, but when you're talking about under 16-year-old females and or males, they are risk takers. They're going to be defiant. So the people that can afford to pay the fine are going to pay the fine because they're parents, so they'll pay the fine. And that happens all the time. Those that can't pay can't afford to pay. So I just think that a teenager should be made aware of what the recourse is of not wearing that helmet. Somehow, make them take a tour of the morgue up at the hospital, or I really don't know. I mean, it's something that would cost more than just enforcing it through the bylaw officer. So that's my problem with the whole point of this bylaw.
Okay, well, thank you for your comment. Councillor Thorkelson.
Well, I second the motion to amend it with the shall, because I think that I think that being able to buy a helmet, it should be clear that you can buy a helmet instead. But what I guess this says a parent or guardian of a person under the age of 16 commits an offense if the parent or guardian authorizes or knowingly permits the person not to wear a helmet. So if a parent says, go and play, Johnny, without your helmet, that is something that a parent has made that decision. It's against the law. That parent has made the decision. It doesn't say if the kid goes out and plays and takes off his helmet, forgets to put it back on, that the parent knowingly, has knowingly authorized that, right? So I think that is acceptable, and I do agree, however, Councillor Grant, with your whole idea of trying to. I think it's with a lot of things. I think that. With a number of things should go through restorative justice instead of through fines, because I totally agree with you. I think that's a much better program, but we aren't set up to do that in Prince Rupert, and someday I hope that we are set up to do that in Prince Rupert, that we can refer things to restorative justice committee in a fashion, and that people will cooperate in the community to and all volunteer to give our time to make sure that youth can or even adults can see that changing their ways is important. But I don't think that's a reason to defeat the bylaw. I think that's a future goal that maybe we can try to work towards, and I really am a big believer in restorative justice, so I agree with you on that point. But I think this is when I read this, I the first time I thought, oh dear, but then it says, who authorizes or knowingly permits. And so I think if an adult knowingly permits their child to go out without a helmet, once you're right, once the kids are gone, they're gone. You don't know what they're doing. But if you knowingly permit your child to go out without a helmet, then I think that you should be called to task. Those brain injuries that occur after that, if somebody lands on their bean, kid lands on their head, it can be devastating for the family, much more than having an initial fine or having to buy their child a helmet. So that's what I think, Your Worship.
All right, thank you for your comment. Further comments, Councillor Cunningham.
I agree 100% with Joy on the restorative justice and that, but that's a whole different topic. Last time we discussed this, Councillor Carlick Pearson brought up a really good idea about the fines or creating a program where kids that can't afford helmets would have a venue to go to get a helmet. And I think we're going to come across a few problems with this bylaw, and unfortunately it's going to happen, where there's going to be kids out there with these longboards or skateboards that cannot afford helmets. But I look at it this way: they could afford a $300 longboard. Yeah. So why the hell can't they afford a helmet? And there's going to be some problems here with this, but in the end, 3 offenses, they're losing that apparatus. Maybe they'll learn that way. I don't know, but like you say, safety is imperative here. You go into any emergency room and talk to any doctor about a helmet, and they strongly recommend a helmet.
Thank you. Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's a lot of controversy going on over this whole damn thing, but we're here to protect the kids. Now, did we consult with the RCMP what they think it should be?
Mrs. Bombin.
Yes, we did. Actually, they approached council, and then staff was directed to discuss it with the RCMP, and this is what's come up.
This is their recommendation. Well, then we go by it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Carlick Pearson.
There is controversy over, but this is change, and it's we're trying to protect primarily our youth and our children from injury. On average, there's 300,000 brain injuries and fatalities combined in children each year in North America. That's huge. So a couple days ago, someone said, well, you guys are just doing another money grab, for the city. Well, I'll tell you right now, it's not a money grab. We're trying to do it in the best interest of our community members. There are a couple ideas that I have, and one of them is that, for instance, I have 2 helmets in my basement, and I would love to talk to the recreation director as well as a couple sporting stores to do a helmet drop annually as they do a hockey swap. And everyone brings their helmets down to the Civic, and then you sort of fit them into people who can't afford them. Because they are expensive. I just bought my son a $129 helmet for skiing or for snowboarding. And it's a big hit, but when we read up on the helmet, everything in the first 5 points were all life-saving, things about it. So we're like, yeah, of course we're going to do it. So I think it's a really good program that and a bylaw that we're implementing. So I really encourage the public to abide by this and get your kids safe, and we'll do as much as we can as a community to try and help out and assist with helmets.
Thank you. Further comments? Councillor Garon.
I don't know if anybody can answer the question, but I know helmets expire, and I have no idea. Is it like a 5-year rating, or is it after 1 or 2 accidents, or does anybody know? Because if you're donating helmets and they've expired. So,
Your Worship, I think it's written inside the helmets. At least it was when people in my family biked. Now people walk.
Thank you. Councillor Carlick Pearson.
I have 2 helmets, say for instance, from last year. My son was 4, and I believe they're good for 2 to 3 years. One of them was 3 years, but it depends on where you're buying it. So if it's Canadian made or if it's CSA approved or whatever, right? It all depends on what's inside the helmet.
Okay, I'll call for the question on the motion to amend. Those in favor? Please show for the record that the motion to amend is passed with Councillor Garon opposed. Now I'll have to ask Council to repeal the 3rd reading of the bylaw. This is a bylaw procedure to insert the amendment. So I ask Council's consideration of the repeal 3rd reading of this bylaw. It's bylaw number 3343, 2014. Moved by Councillor Carlick Pearson, seconded by Councillor Kenny. The motion is the 3rd reading of the bylaw be repealed. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. That motion's adopted. Now I'll ask Council to consider a motion to read bylaw 3343, 2014 for a second time as amended. Moved by Councillor Carlick Pearson, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Opposed? Please show for the record that Councillor Garon is opposed. Now I'll ask Council to read the bylaw number 3343, 2014 for a 3rd time as amended. Moved by Councillor Carlick Pearson, seconded by Councillor Kinney. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Those opposed? Please show for the record that Councillor Garon is opposed. Now I believe that you'll have to take that bylaw to the next council meeting for final adoption. Did we miss any of the steps there? No? Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next bylaw for consideration. This is a zoning amendment bylaw, and it's number 3344/2014, and it recommends to council that they introduce and give the first reading to the City of Prince Rupert amendment bylaw number 3343/2014, and instructs staff to commence the referral process and public notification. And once again, this is a zoning amendment bylaw. I'll ask Mr. Krekic to outline the text of the bylaw, please, should it come into force and effect.
Certainly, Your Worship. This proposal is by Prince Rupert Living Concepts Incorporated. The applicants are sitting in the audience patiently waiting for this item to come up. It is for townhouse complex at the end of the current Graham Avenue, end of the current Graham Avenue Road. The zoning amendment will place the property into multifamily development, and consequently also will require development permit, and therefore you have both applications attached to the report. Within the context of the process, the zoning application has to be approved first, and then development permit following that. The applicants have been working with staff on a number of months on various options. The site has some challenges with a steep terrain, as well as have some opportunities with incredible view. And the development costs are also involved in a project, and single-family dwelling unit, because of the challenges, would probably bring the cost of the houses to some prohibitive number. Consequently, going to multifamily development, the project will gain economic value. That being said, it also follows the basic principles of the official community plan, which is to remain in a tighter footprint of the community, as well as it speaks to what we have heard quite often in a city hall at the counter, a demand for that kind of a housing. The staff generally, in conclusion, the staff generally supports the application and is keenly aware of the concerns which arise from densification, therefore giving ample time for review and introducing the project to the community is prudent prior to calling for public hearing. Your Worship.
Thank you very much. I'll ask Council's consideration of the recommendation to give the bylaw the first reading. Moved by Councillor Kinney, seconded by Councillor Garon. That motion, of course, also instructs staff to commence the referral process and public notification. Is there any, I'll call for the discussion on the motion. Councillor Garon, and then Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
Yeah, I think it's something that's really needed in the community, and I hope that the neighborhood there would embrace this project, because it's, I know a lot of people who want to stay in the community instead of retiring and moving somewhere else, and I think this would be a good opportunity for them, as well as anybody else that wanted to live there that wasn't retired, but I know it would be a real asset to the community.
Yeah. Thank you. Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
Do we foresee a new development in that area that has a pristine view? As you said, some of them may. Would it increase the taxes for that area? It would. Okay, thanks. Maybe not pristine, but a view. Yeah.
Councillor Thorkelson.
I just must be really thick tonight, but I'm not quite sure what we're
considering possible rezoning of a piece of property.
Oh, that I understand.
From 6 units to 11 units with the change of zoning.
That's correct. I understand that, but it says staff generally supports this application, is keenly aware of the concerns which arise from densification, giving ample time for review and introducing the project to the community is prudent prior to calling for the public hearing. So all I was wondering was the process here. So if we're instructing if we're giving first reading to the City of Prince Rupert zoning amendment bylaw and instructing staff to commence the referral process and the public notification process, what's different of that between that and a public hearing? That's what I'm concerned.
Go ahead, Mr. Cricket.
Generally, this council is accustomed to planning department taking the rezoning application into sittings. Basically, at this time, generally, you'll be calling for a public hearing. In this situation, for perhaps the reason that I noted in my conclusion, as well as that the office is getting quite a bit busier these days, I wanted to allow ample time to get through the referral process internally and as well as externally before we are ready to call for public hearing. So there's absolutely nothing different between the two. It's just the recommendation is for the first reading only. And the conclusion is to allow for referral process to proceed with some ample time.
And the referral process will be having a public meeting, not a formal private public hearing to begin with.
There will be no public information meeting. There will be only a public hearing at the time that will be announced at the next council meeting.
So the dates will be set and the notification would go out, and of course not only would there be a notification in the newspaper, but the adjacent property owners would also be notified.
I was just thinking of the last...
The difference there is the city owned the last piece of property. This is a privately held piece of property.
Okay, thank you.
I'll ask Councillor Cunningham, please go ahead. Sorry.
I'm going to echo Councillor Garon's feelings on this. You know, I've noticed lately that we've got a lot of the youth moving back to the town, and a lot of the elders or seniors want to sell their property and stay in town where their kids and that are, and there's no place for them to buy. You know, so what's happening is they're leaving, going down to Qualicum, Parksville. We all know people have moved down there, and with them is going a lot of capital that they've amassed during their lifetime here, including the sale of their house, and they're not reinvesting back into the community. And this is an opportunity, hopefully the neighbors in the neighborhood will agree with us, to keep some of those people here and reinvest in the community after they've wanted to get rid of their house and have a place where they can live for 6-7 months, lock it up and hit the road and do whatever they want to do.
You're correct. I think everybody feels that. And we were trying to do that on the street above. The neighborhood had some concerns in that particular location. Maybe they won't at this. Each individual location, of course, is considered independently, but you are correct. There's people that are looking for some sort of retirement turnkey home where they can come and go, not have to do property maintenance, whether it's cutting the lawns or other things, or building maintenance such as painting. And these sorts of housing projects present that opportunity, although this one in particular is for some people that are having mobility problems or could be having in the future. But you are correct. There is some form of retirement housing that we keep hearing about within the community. Any further comments? Yes, please go ahead, Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
I totally agree. I'm not opposed to any new developments, especially for people, say, my age, moving into the community with families. We need newer places, modern places. I just don't know if the residents up there could handle another increase in their taxes, as they're already being taxed so much. And I don't live up there, but I know that even where I live, it's tough to pay those taxes. I am interested in seeing the process and seeing what the community, as well as the residents around Graham, how they feel. So I'll vote in favor of this.
Certainly.
How will the adjacent properties taxes be affected by this project going up? If anything, there will be more tax. There will be more tax revenue from the property they're developing, but I can't see it affecting the taxes of other properties. They're assessed on their own merit. And you know, like this development in some ways, you know, some people might think it's going to be detriment to their assessment. You know, like I can't see the individual properties there going any higher just because of this development, but I can see the city getting more tax revenue because right now we're taxing 2 raw lots, and there's going to be a development there that'll be worth $1 million, $1.5 million, whatever the value of it is, and we will be taxing that and getting more tax revenue.
Thank you. Councillor Garon.
Thank you, Your Worship. A question for staff. What would the taxes, just a ballpark figure, say on those 10 units be if they were valued at $300,000 each? I don't know, just ballpark, not holding you to anything. So it's more than $10,000 and less than $100,000. Yeah, just say they were worth that much.
Say $3.3 million at the mill rate.
Okay, well let's move on then.
It'll be a lot more than what the lots are generating.
Let's ask the proponents. Mr. Scott, have you got an idea?
I'm sorry,
Have you got an idea of how much taxes would be generated by this proposed development? You must have figured it out for your budgeting.
I haven't figured out the taxes. We're trying to figure out what it would cost.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're far from getting that, doing that. It's going to take quite a bit of that, engineering work to confirm the cost.
Certainly. Thank you. A ballpark figure, right. Thank you very much. So I'll ask Council's consideration of the recommendations. Councillor Thorkelson.
Well, I think this is, it looks like a really, at least the architect's drawings here look like a rendition, looks like a very attractive complex. I hope that it fits in, the community thinks it fits in with their, we have to do something with densification, but I was wondering on that picture, and I just can't see if there is an explanation anywhere. If that's just a house that is next door on these that's just a house. That square thing isn't part of the property. I mean, that's not part of the.
That's the mass of the house next door.
Yeah. That's what I thought, but I was wondering what you had, a concrete building, this beautiful structure, and then this poor house next door. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you can see how high it is and everything. Yeah. Nice.
I'll ask Council's consideration of the motion. Question's been called. Those in favor? Those opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Long, under additional items, you've got a request for members of council to travel. Would you please outline it?
Yes, Your Worship, there's a request here from the BG Group to invite a member of council to attend one of their facilities at Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. So the request to council would be? You got a
motion?
worded
Resolution to approve the attendance of one member of council to go to Trinidad and Tobago.
At no cost to the city.
That's correct.
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Carlick-Pearson, seconded by Councillor Kenny. Is there any discussion?
Question.
Councillor Garon, you had... Please go ahead.
I'll be attending on behalf of council, and I look forward to reporting back on what the experience is like and what an LNG facility is like. So I'll piggyback on Mayor Masalem's report probably that he brought back with him. So I'm curious to see exactly... I'll bring some gas back.
Thank
you.
you.
I'm really curious to see what one of these facilities looks like to get a better understanding.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
I'm not sure what the process is of if we appointed someone to go, but I've also responded to the request.
I believe the last council meeting was asked if anybody wanted to go, and I responded I think last week sometime or a couple days later.
There may be an opportunity to send more than one.
I believe the regional district isn't sending anybody, so I know they were asked, but according to Councillor Kinney, nobody's going from there. So
quite possibly. So if staff could check whether there's an opportunity for 2 to travel. The motion's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. Motion is passed. Yes, Councillor Mrs. Bombin, please go ahead.
I'd just like to direct you to item number 9, resolutions from closed meetings.
Okay. I didn't see it marked on here, so I didn't mention it before, but certainly please read them out.
The resolution from the closed meeting was to release the board appointments as followed. Mr. Peter Maximission was appointed to the Public Library Board to fill a vacant position, expiry July 26, 2014, and Mr. Andrew Hamilton was reappointed to Port Edward Historical Society for a 3-year term.
Thank you very much. Yes, please go ahead, Councillor Carlick-Pearson.
I have a question about the appointment of Steve Robin to the Recreation Committee. That what's going on with that as the term actually expires March 15th?
The bylaw, I believe, has been adopted, and that changes, or that doesn't change, but that allows for the creation of a Recreation Commission. Mm-hmm. So council, with the adoption of the bylaw, if they so choose, could disband the commission, mm-hmm. or pardon me, disband the Recreation Committee, mm-hmm. and then appoint people to the Recreation Commission under that bylaw.
Can we have some correspondence with Mr. Robin regarding this? Well, he's emailed us a couple times, myself and Anna Ashley, about this to find out.
Well, perhaps you'd like to make a motion to advertise that we have a commission and we're looking for community-minded people that are involved in sports to make application. That would kick off that process.
Okay, I'll support that motion.
So it's been moved by Councillor Carlick-Pearson, seconded by Councillor Kinney, that the city advertise for possible participants in the city's newly formed Recreation Commission. Any further discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. The motion's adopted. Councillor Cunningham.
Don't we have to appoint a third councillor to that commission too?
Yes, but we can get these other appointments also. Yeah, it's all laid out in the bylaw. Yeah. It actually says in the bylaw that the mayor appoints the chair. So we'll move on to the report of the city manager, Mr. Long.
Thank you, Worship. Given the lateness of the hour, I think I'm going to defer until next meeting. I want to talk about the strategic priorities that Council has established in January and just lay that out, but I think I'll wait until next meeting to do that. Thanks.
Okay. We'll move on to reports, questions, inquiries from members of Council. Councillor Garon. No?
I was just remembering about BC Ferries, but you're going to do that in your...
Right. Okay. If there's... Moving right along here, I'll do the mayor's report. So I intended the informal reception hosted by the Community to Community Forum partners, and Councillors Garon and Kinney were also in attendance with council members from Kitkatla and Port Edward. I participated in the Prince Rupert Liquefied Natural Gas workshop to discuss marine-related shipping issues for the project, as well as general marine use in the area, and identifying and evaluating hazards and risk controls. The BG Group is expecting to make a business decision about this project sometime during 2016. Councillors Ashley, Cunningham, Garon, Thorkelson, and myself attended a meeting with senior staff representatives of the Prince Rupert Port Authority to obtain an update on current port-related activities. And the Prince Rupert Airport Authority has reported that the total number of passengers facilitated at the airport during the month of January 2014 was 3,946. Councillors Ashley, Cunningham, Garon, and Carlick Pearson, along with myself, attended a meeting with the chairman and board of directors of the Prince Rupert Port Authority, along with their senior management. The council members discussed a variety of topics to do with port development in the city. Some of these topics were further export terminal developments, land for future development of port logistics centers, also waterfront planning, and the PILT, that is a payment in lieu of taxes, and that process. The chairman of the Port Authority announced that the port and city are still working through the PILT process, and the Port Authority offered the city additional funds as part of that process. The port and the city will continue their meetings in the future. Councillor Carlick Pearson, Councillor Cunningham, Councillor Garon, and myself attended a meeting with the president and a project manager along with a community liaison officer of the Pacific Northwest Liquefied Natural Gas Export Terminal project. Members of the council had an opportunity to ask a variety of questions about the project, and the project is expected to start construction in January 2015. They expect to be shipping liquefied natural gas early in 2019. The projected construction time period is 48 to 52 months. The number of construction workers at the height of construction is now expected to be 4,000 people. The number of direct year-round jobs after construction is expected to be for 330 people. The number of indirect year-round jobs after construction is expected to be for 300 people in the community. There will be opportunities for local companies, also skills training programs for workers during construction, and also for the everyday operation of the export terminal. And there will be more information available at the Pacific Northwest LNG Export Terminal Project Office on 3rd Avenue West at the Capitol Mall building. One item the communities of Prince Rupert and Port Ed must keep in mind is that this project could go for, and this is very interesting, and I've already talked to the airport authority about this, but this project could go from 1 to 4,000 construction workers in 18 to 20 months once the project starts. So that's quite a rapid increase. I attended the open house hosted by the Member of Parliament Nathan Cullen at the Tom Rooney Playhouse. There were 4 presenters who talked about various considerations concerning the exporting of liquefied natural gas. It was a good information session attended by approximately 60 to 70 people, and there was lots of opportunity to ask various questions about liquefied natural gas. Councillor Cunningham was also in attendance. With regard to BC Ferries and their proposed cuts to service, the City of Prince Rupert and Tourism Prince Rupert have gathered information from hospitality tourism providers on a regional basis, pointing out on behalf of communities how detrimental it is to reduce ferry services on very short notice. It not only affects tourism, but also the quality of life of local citizens and access to Prince Rupert for health care and other services. A reduction in ferry services also affects museums, hotels, eateries, bed and breakfasts from Valemount to Prince Rupert and Haida Gwaii, and again from Prince Rupert to 100 Mile House. Prince Rupert is a hub city for 3 different ferry routes. The information gathered also shows that 79% of the railway passengers come here to get on a ferry. That could negatively impact our Via Rail service also. The City of Prince Rupert and Tourism Prince Rupert representatives will be meeting with the Ferry Advisory Committee members for the North and Central Coast and the BC Ferry Services representatives next week. So we've got a variety of information. It's just whether or not the council can make an impact, along with representatives from the Central and North Coast other communities that are on this Ferry Advisory Committee, and whether or not the government will, this is the provincial government, will have an understanding that when you come up with something that you think about perhaps in September, October, November, and announce it in December, and you want to implement it in March or April of the subsequent year, that it could greatly reduce and in some cases wipe out some of the tourism that comes from other places. And of course, the communities have been spending years not only building the summer service, but building the shoulder seasons in the spring and the fall so that we can bolster tourism here. And of course, we all know that if you have museums or you have heritage villages or other facilities, and you're not getting the rubber-tired traffic through there, those facilities are all going to be coming to their local governments for more funding to support them where they lose revenue. So this is just not a Prince Rupert matter. This is rubber-tired traffic all the way from our border in the east, all the way to Haida Gwaii, and really down south. And it's the circle tourism that really does promote tourism throughout British Columbia. So hopefully we have the opportunity to get that across. And there's a very well-worded report that when it's read in its entirety, you realize that it's just not a straightforward issue, that it involves a variety of communities in a variety of ways, and it's just not hospitality tourism. It takes a slice out of everybody's economy. And it's one thing to say, well, the hotels in Prince Rupert are pretty busy, the hotels in Terrace are pretty busy, the hotels in Prince George are pretty busy, but it's everybody along the route, and it's a percentage. And the report will be provided to Council. We will also be providing the report to all of the municipalities between Prince Rupert and Valemount, and we'll also be providing the report again from Prince Rupert to Prince George and down to 100 Mile House. It affects everybody, and there's other communities that also have a concern. And once we've had this meeting, if need be, we'll take this issue to the North Central Local Government Association and further to the UBCM, and I intend to have this report also sent to the UBCM, and hopefully we can have some input there. And we'll continue advocating until the government says otherwise. This really means a lot to Northern British Columbia. It's very, very severe to make these changes in a short time frame. It really does create a lot of risk. That concludes my report. Councillor Cunningham.
This ferry thing, it's not just risk that's involved here, it's lifestyles, life period in the north. You know, I recently went to Bella Coola, and I was under the impression it had been solved a bit. They just put a Band-Aid on it, and the Band-Aid's fallen off already. And people that have spent their life building businesses are now in fear of losing everything they've worked for their whole life. In Bella Coola, you know, in the Chilcotins, I stopped at different places there, and the people they're just besides themselves. They're, you know, like they're devastated. And you know, I don't know where the Liberal government's coming from, because when you look at the cuts they're making in that and the taxes they're going to lose on all the businesses and all the tourism in that, it doesn't make sense. The dollars and cents just don't add up. I don't know where they're coming from, and if we got to take a hammer down there and hit them between the eyes to get them to realize it, something's got to be done. I don't think people realize the devastation this is going to cause in Haida Gwaii, and then just drive from here to the Hazeltons and look at all these little mom and pop operations that are just going to go out of business, or they're, you know, they're like chickens in a barnyard scratching the ground now, and there's going to be nothing left to scratch.
Well, the best thing that could happen is the government, if cooler heads were to prevail, and they decided to wait for a year and actually did some investigation and did an economic assessment of the impact that these reductions would have across the north and down Vancouver Island. The other end of it, it's not just Valemount to Haida Gwaii or here to 100 Mile House. It's also Port Hardy, Port McNeil, Campbell River, and the communities between Campbell River all the way down in Nanaimo. And these circle routes are the lifeblood of tourism in British Columbia. And this would negatively impact it in a severe way. I don't think they understand it. I really don't. I think they're in Victoria, and I don't think they get out of Victoria enough.
I think they're ignoring everything from the Malhad north. You know, like it's the whole coast depends on these ferries, and you know, you hear over and over again it's the coastal, it's part of the highway system and that. Well, you know, I just don't know what the answer is, but it's we've got to make a lot of noise over this, and I don't know if it's going to do any good, but we've got to try.
Thank you. Councillor Garon and then Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. How many people will be in your delegation that you're going with?
There is 3 from Prince Rupert.
And as a group, like how many?
Well, there'll be the chair of the North and Central Coast Ferry Advisory Committee. I believe you could have the mayor of Masset there, perhaps the chair of the regional district. And I'm not sure who else. Perhaps there's other representatives. I know that there's representatives on the Central Coast, and I know there's representatives on Northern Vancouver Island, but from around here, I think.
So do you have a collective meeting together with the minister, or is it just...
No, we have a meeting, an all-day meeting the day after tomorrow with representatives of the BC Ferry Service, and then the day after I have a meeting with the minister.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kinney.
Thank you, Your Worship. While you're there, I want it to be said on our behalf, it's not just tourism and people in business that are going to suffer. Our kids on the islands are going to suffer. Their health care isn't going to be looked after. They can't come here for dental work. Nothing.
That's in the report.
Yes.
Thank you. Any further comments? If not, I'll ask Council for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Carlick-Pearson, seconded by Councillor Garon. Any discussion? Question's been called. Those in favor? Thank you. This meeting stands adjourned.